This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney. Is Michael Barr in today, John?
Yes, he is, but I think I'm filling in for him.
He reports in as well. Is Lisa Mateo in? No, Lisa Mateo
I'm filling in for her.
The entire week. Well deserved. She's been killing it for Bloomberg, out on a number of tours, talking to people nationwide. Lisa Mateo off today. John Tucker is with us, and in for Paul Sweeney is David Gura. Perfect day after the Vice President does an interview, and we've got a very strong 9 o'clock hour. We'll go to the White House in the 9 o'clock hour, just in sync on what President Biden's been doing. And of course, David Wasserman will join us on the Cook political report as well. But we're also looking at markets drifting away from the gloom. Futures up 27, NASDAQ up 0.8%. Dell survives, NVIDIA survives. And I guess we move higher. China news, we'll get to that. Intel news, we'll get to that. Just lots going on. David, I want to, just to start here before we get to John Tucker and get rolling, Sam Stovall with us in moments on how you need to think over the Labor Day weekend about your portfolio. When did we start smiling in interviews? I don't remember Tim Russert or John Chancellor or Mr. Cronkite smiling. Everything is it's not about Republicans or Democrats. It's both. We're all friends. We're all here. When did this start?
I couldn't date when that. I know you'd never smile in an interview, Tom.
No, I don't.
Of course, there's that dour look that we're accustomed to. But I think you're referring to Dana Bash in this interview yesterday. I mean, there were some odd dynamics at play here. She's interviewed the vice president several times before. This is a tricky interview to do. And then the real smiling face I paid attention to was that of Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, who really just sat there for most of the interview. He fielded a few questions.
Well, that's vice presidential.
Yes, arm candy for the main subject of the interview. But you'll find me smiling. You don't have to do it.
Okay, you could be smile-free.
Right,
John, are you smiling today?
James Taylor concert this weekend. Whenever I see your smiling face.
Very good. It's good to hear that. We're out on YouTube. It's been a real big success for us this summer. Thank you so much for your support this summer. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts out on YouTube, on Android Auto, on Apple CarPlay as well. One other note, days away, hours as a countdown clock right over John Tucker's right shoulder, September 3rd, 92.9 FM in Boston. Thrilled with that much ginormous signal from Mount Katahdin to Block Island in the National Hotel, 92.9 FM in Boston. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, smiling John Tucker.
Yeah, I remember being in this seat for Dow 10,000. Dow, another record close yesterday. Could do it again today. Dow futures up 96 points right now. S&P E-mini futures 25 points higher. The NASDAQ futures up 144 points right now on this Warren Buffett birthday day. Think of history of this company. The traders rate, Robert Noyce, Gordon Moore, part of the fabric of the Valley, 56 years in business. Intel considering splitting up pre-market shares. They are higher, about 2%. Dell Technologies reporting second quarter results. They beat expectations, particular strength there in orders for AI servers. Lululemon Athletica shares rising after the company reported second quarter earnings. The firm reported top-line miss in the second quarter, also reduced its full-year guidance. Ulta Beauty shares, they're lower. The retailer trimming its sales forecast. And right now, as we track treasuries ahead of some important data today, 2-year unchanged, 3.9%, 10-year unchanged, 3.85%. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. Did I mention NVIDIA shares? They're higher pre-market. Right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. David. Hi, David. And Tom.
Hi, John. Nice to see you.
Oh, God, so happy here. I can't stand it. Let's go to someone grim. Sam Stovall gets us started this morning, of course, with all of his good work on the equity markets. Sam, what is the character, the nature of this bull market?
Good morning, Tom. Well, I think the character is one that it's pretty much on target with what history says typically happens in an election year. I mean, surprisingly, the S&P is up 1.3% in the month of August, but normally the market is down in August, except for election years when it's up about 1.3%. So what we really have to sort of worry about is what happens next, September and
Oh,
October.
listen to you. Your father never said that. Robert Stovall never said worry about what happens next. What is the character of technology after the idiot in NVIDIA frenzy the other day? We got Dell reporting in that. Is technology creating profit and free cash flow to get a CFRA 5-star?
It is generating profits and cash flow, most definitely. Expectations are for good earnings growth in the year ahead. We think we're going to end up seeing about 20+% for the technology group in 2025, as compared with about 14.5 for the S&P 500. And even though we've been seeing technology sort of treading water this month, NVIDIA just not beating by as much of a margin as investors had been hoping, we still think that this is a 2025 story, and this company is a monster when it comes to cash flow. So investors should stick with it regardless of the volatility.
Sam, let me ask you about those NVIDIA earnings, and only with this company could they be construed as disappointing. And I wonder what the broader takeaway of that is when you look at earnings and how we process them and understand them. What do you make of the reaction that we saw there to this company that's been such a focus point over these last couple of years?
Well, it is sort of interesting, when you cheer like a baseball player that the last 5 times at bat hit a grand slam home run, and then this time they only hit a single home run. Are you disappointed? When actually here is a company that has grown revenues 122% over the last year, where we have seen it top $30 billion. And so, I think that the expectations are that, well, we need to maintain earnings growth because technology is currently trading at about a 60% premium to its average PE ratio going back to the tech bubble. So I think investors are saying, yeah, I'm happy to be with stocks, happy to be with tech, but you have to prove it every time with an earnings report.
Sam, let's widen the aperture here. We talk a lot about generative AI, talk a lot about technology as we make our way through this second quarter earnings period. What are the other sectors that stand out to you? What are we missing as we focus so much on AI and on tech?
Well, I think that what we're missing are some of the more mundane aspects in terms of lower interest rates likely to be coming fairly soon, where we expected to see growth potential, et cetera. I mean, we have had an overweight recommendation on the financials group for quite some time. Essentially 62% of the stocks in the financial sector have a buy or a strong buy recommendation. And it's not just, one group or two. Certainly diversified banks have been doing very well. Property casualty insurance groups have been strong, but also regionals, super regionals have been showing improvement. So, I would tend to say that financials is one that has been doing quite well, sort of under the radar.
And now we're going to do something, folks, I've never done. We can do this with the excellence of Sam Stovall and CFRA and their wonderful STAR system, their methodical approach, where short term is 3 years. I want you to review, Sam Stovall.
He's smiling, by the way. I know, just for our YouTube viewers.
How CFR handled Intel. Take us back 2000, moonshot to 75, crater, recovery to the pandemic, crater. How did you people review that debacle?
Oh, well, not to put me on the spot too much there, Tom. I do know that we got out of Intel and the chip stocks and technology in general a little bit too early. back during the tech bubble. So, maybe we were a bit like Greenspan. Maybe we were a bit like the advanced decline line that had peaked in April of 1998. So we did downgrade many of the tech groups a little bit early. But at the same time, I think we have been a big proponent of technology because of the growth aspects and just how well the group has done over the last several years. So,
yeah. Did you, and folks, just so you understand, my mother was thrown under the bus by Robert Stovall loading the boat on Anaconda Copper years ago. But quickly, Sam Stovall, just quickly here, in the last year or two, how have you treated Intel? Is it a restructuring candidate, or did you see anything there?
Well, restructuring candidate also was a pretty high dividend payer, so one that had attracted attention. But the thought being that, a growth company offering a very high dividend yield sort of caused investors to be scratching their heads to say either the dividend gets cut or something dramatic changes for this company, so that it's no longer really a growth company and more of an income play.
Thank you for that. Sam Stovall, just brilliant there in Intel. We'll have much more. Look to Ed Ludlow, Caroline Hyde, Bloomberg Technology, for the workout of INTC. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, David, John. Vice President Kamala Harris has sustained the burst of momentum she brought to the presidential race. According to the latest Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll, Harris is leading or tied with the Republican Donald Trump in each of the 7 states most likely to decide the race. Harris now leads by 2 percentage points among the registered voters across the 7 states. She is 1 point ahead, a statistical tie among likely voters. Vice President Harris defended shifting away from some of her more liberal positions in her first major television interview of her presidential campaign. On CNN, Harris talked about changes in her policies over the years, specifically her reversals on fracking and decriminalizing illegal border crossings. As for other issues,
extending the child tax credit to $6,000 for families for the first year of their child's life. There's the work that we're going to do that is about investing in the American family around affordable housing, a big issue in our country right now.
Former President Trump says he watched some of the CNN interview with Vice President Harris. He spoke at a town hall in La Crosse, Wisconsin last night.
She didn't look like a leader to me, I'll be honest. I don't see her negotiating with President Xi of China. I don't see her with Kim Jong-un like we did with Kim Jong-un.
Trump is set to appear at the annual gathering of the group Moms for Liberty. The national nonprofit has spearheaded efforts to get mentions of LGBTQ identity and structural racism out of K-12 classrooms. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky proposed holding a summit aimed at ending the war with Russia in India during a visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi last week. According to people familiar with the exchange, Zelensky aims to hold a second leaders' meeting before the U.S. presidential election in November as a follow-up to a summit in June. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, David, John.
Can we have a moment of silence for the fact that the madness starts in the professional sport of college football this weekend? We covered that yesterday. And, I frankly don't understand it. But can I notice the serenity and peace that high above Cayuga's waters, Cornell doesn't get it going until September 21.
We take our time. And
we take
haven't
our time.
been having well. Either.
Come back, have a Yingling beer, right?
Or 3.
Stop by the Rongovian Embassy and chow down.
Yes.
And then, when training starts, September 6th?
Yeah, thereabouts.
Something like that.
There's other stuff to do.
Yeah. The Ivy League just does it right. Not a big deal. Colgate, Cornell, 21.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Another record close for the Dow, and could see the same thing today. Dow futures 96 points higher. The S&P E-mini futures right now 25 points higher. The NASDAQ futures, they are up 146 points. Treasuries on course for their longest monthly winning streak in 3 years. Prices up, yield down. NVIDIA pre-market, that is edging higher following yesterday's 6% drop. Other tech names, including Marvell Technology, Dell Technology, getting a boost by forecast-beating results. Europe's main stock index, that rallied to a record high. Under the heading of When the Facts Change, I Change, President Xi of China considering allowing homeowners there to refinance as much as $5.4 trillion of mortgages. They're trying to boost consumption. And China's central bank also started trading government bonds. As we look at oil, steady, the main crude benchmark set for the first back-to-back monthly loss this year. I filled up under $2.99.
Really, $2.99 at the
it was
Wawa?
the cash price at one of those off-brand, like Joe's Gas.
Well, you don't even know if it's gas. It's just something.
Well, more important, you don't know what's in the tank.
But does the Hummer work as well with that cheap garbage gas?
I've electrified it. The problem is the solar panels I installed on the roof keep flying off on the turnpike.
Vegetable oil conversion. Yeah.
But really, $2.99 is not $3. It's like GDP yesterday.
That's, what do they say, the important psychological level or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's full service. It's New Jersey. It's full.
Kind of.
Kind of. Not at Joe's Gas.
Like, can you get to on the EV Hummer? Can you get to Philadelphia?
You can get to the end of the driveway and get the mail. That's about it.
Turn around and come back.
Gotta walk back, yeah.
John Tucker, thank you for that. This is an important conversation. We've got a lot of distractions on this Friday before the holiday, but there's something out there. John Tucker just absolutely nailed it, and it was one of my themes yesterday at Bretton Woods. Keynes with major cardiac issues, failing, and of course the iconic Keynes, when the facts change, I change. The facts in Beijing are changing, and they are changing. Joining us now, Jane Foley of Rabobank. Jane, all my radar's on China. I'm sorry, they're adjusting. First of all, when you see strong renminbi, what does that signal about what Xi and the leadership must do?
Well, it has been stronger, but I think we all know that the outlook for the Chinese economy has remained, fairly damaged, and I think that this is obviously a recognition of a lot of the geopolitical tensions that are existing between the US and China, but also various other parts of the world and China, Europe, and China particularly. And yes, we are seeing at the end of this week, efforts again, new efforts by the authorities to try and pump up, consumer demand in China. And yes, there has been a positive reaction in the stock markets to that. But I think we all know, if we look at, say, FDI surveys this year, a lot of them, suggesting that they're at multi-decade lows, FDI flows into China, multi-decade lows. And there lies your problem, because has been a real sea change. And I think we all recognize this about the outlook for China, its relationship with the West. And this is going to be an issue for the Chinese authorities going forward.
With all of your abilities and with Rabobank's heritage, don't you have to say they will adjust? There's a point where China looks politically, the David Gura world, they look politically, they look holistically, and they say 3% real GDP is unacceptable. Let's change. Are we in that mood right now into 2025?
That they are having to adjust, and I think the rest of the world is also adjusting to perhaps a different outlook for the Chinese economy than we had perhaps imagined maybe 5, 6, 10 years ago. We're not going to have that same relationship. The outlook for growth is therefore, over the medium term, different. It means that there are going to be other countries that will benefit more. Look at the trade, for instance, between the US and Mexico now. Look at other countries, Canada, perhaps even Ireland. There are other various countries, Thailand, who are going to benefit from that changing geopolitical climate. And I think the other country that I'd probably have to list is Japan. Has the relationship between Japan and the US strengthened? Can it be strengthened? Will it be strengthened as a consequence of the change in the relationship between the US and China? So, that there will be winners and there will be losers on this, but I think the outlook, the medium term, the longer term outlook for China has certainly adjusted.
Jane, David Gura here. Lovely to speak with you as always. And I wanted to ask you about the meetings that we saw over the course of the weekend. Jake Sullivan traveling to China, the National Security Advisor to President Biden, meeting with Chinese leadership, including President Xi. And the message from that very much was this needs to be a more stable relationship. What stood out to you from the commentary surrounding those meetings? And as we near here the end of the Biden administration, give us your sense of how much that relationship, both politically and policy-wise, has been stabilized from the place that it was in 3.5 years ago.
Well, I think we've had sort of similar sort of messages, perhaps from Janet Yellen when she was in China. That the message is that the trade links around the world cannot be reversed. We're not going to see a complete protectionism adopting it into the US economy, but we are seeing change. We cannot take China out of the equation when we come to trade across the world. We cannot. It's too big. It's too significant. But we will see adjustments. We have seen adjustments. And I think the messages are that China is still a very important piece of the puzzle when it comes to world trade. But the growth in that relationship is what has changed. And we're not going to see the growth in that relationship between the US and China, Europe and China, that had been exhibited or expected maybe 5-10 years ago. And I think one real obvious country that has been seeing perhaps the downside of that is Germany. When you think about how important China has been for Germany's automotive sector, for many of its electronics sector, Germany put the machine tools into China that was necessary for China to become that big manufacturing base that it was. And with China's demand slowing, well, Germany could fall back into a technical recession again this quarter. So, we are seeing a change in the relationship. And like I say, that there's winners and there's losers. But the message I think that we're getting from Sullivan, the message that we got for Janet Yellen is that you can't just take China out of the equation. It's just that growth in that relationship has altered.
Jane, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. A quick China brief there, something we're following. And look to our Asia team, Yvonne Mann and all, Steve Engel out of Hong Kong with their leadership on a changing China. Let me give you that Yuan quote. Right now, my eyes are not failing me. 7.09, stronger Yuan. Okay, David, I want to take 90 seconds on this. I did a Google search, and I typed in a name familiar, Joe Biden. Okay. And I went to news. And there's like hardly any news. I mean, I think when Reagan was here, Bush Sr. was here, you do that sort of final dash to the inauguration where you stand there and give it to whoever the winner is. The National Review, I mean, come on, William Buckley 101, conservative rag, and the National Review in an article, basically here says, remember Joe Biden. Isn't it normal that he's allowed to go on vacation given the cards dealt?
He headed out to California for a vacation that coincided with the Democratic National Convention, and he's back in Washington now and is dealing with any matter of things in his portfolio he hopes to tie up by the end of his term. Yes, it's normal. We kind of saw this manifest itself in that interview last night. Vice President Harris really embracing Joe Biden, trying to bolster his legacy. We know there are things that he hopes to accomplish before the end of this. Chief among that is the ceasefire in the Middle East. But what the point that she made in that interview is that he's not running because he's determined he's not the best candidate to do it at this point in time. But what she and Democrats are saying is he's still an effective policymaker and president, and vacation aside, he's still plugging along.
Lots to talk about here. 9 o'clock hour. We're going to do a little more on this with David Gura. Of course, the big take. Look to the big take. Gura doing it like 1 day a week. Are you doing it 1 day a week or 6 days?
0.75. No, yes.
Into 2025. All Gura. The big take. Doing bigly well for us here. A real long thought on a single story. Look for that each and every day on an Apple podcast. The big take with David Gura. Futures up 24. NASDAQ futures up, rounded up, 0.8%. Wow. The Paul Sweeney yield, the 2-year yield, 3.90%. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Stock futures point to a higher open after yesterday's record close with the Dow. Dow futures right now up 92 points. S&P futures up 23. The NASDAQ E-mini futures up 139. Dell shares up pre-market. Marvell Technology shares up close to 11%. And after yesterday's over 6% decline, NVIDIA shares pre-market up 1%. According to Bloomberg, a U.S. Treasury Total Return Index, U.S. government bonds returned 1.5% August through yesterday, set for the fourth month of gains. This would be the longest run since July 2021. Data this morning, of course, the Fed's preferred inflation measure. That's at 8:30 Wall Street time. New Bureau of Labor Statistics projections show the U.S. labor market expected to grow by 0.4% a year through 2033. That's less than 1/3 of the pace in the preceding decade. We're getting older, and who's going to replace us when we keel over? That's a big question. We check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business.
Morning, John.
David Doyle almost fell off his chair when you said that. Young Doyle is like,
well,
what?
it excludes David, of course. I was looking at you. Sorry.
That was grim.
It was grim.
Can you smile like the governor of Minnesota, please? Do something. John Tucker, thank you for that wisdom. Luckiest guy on Wall Street. David Doyle gets to work with Terry Weissman every single day at Macquarie, the Australia Combine in Melbourne. I got lectured last year. I said Melbourne.
Yes.
It's like you're an amateur. Melbourne. David Doyle joins us now on the American economy. What's it like working with Terry Weissman? He's like a legend out there. Day to day, what is it like, David Doyle, working with Terry Weissman?
He's a wealth of information, and it always surprises me, or there's no end to sort of the knowledge he has, not just about the developed market economies, but also the emerging markets, and that's what always makes me look to Thierry for feedback and guidance, is just his experience and the breadth of his knowledge.
That's what I say about you, Tom, to a T.
Yeah, please. Terry Weissman took his PhD at Harvard, folks, with one of the icons of this show, Benjamin Friedman, who was one of the first people to get behind me. So he's always, Dr. Weissman is always someone I treat carefully because of Ben Friedman and Ben Friedman's legendary view on growth. David Doyle, 3% GDP. We spent 18 months with the Gloom crew getting it wrong. Explain the mystery of growth in America.
Yeah, I think, effectively what we've seen is just an incredible resilience of the economy. And I think in this cycle, things just didn't line up as you would have historically occurred for a recession. So a lot of people, and ourselves included at this time last year, were expecting a recession, a downturn, and it was based on historical relationships and what you typically seen, things like the yield curve having inverted and some of the indicators in housing having deteriorated. But we never saw that cascade through and start to impact the labor market. And why was that the case? I think there's a couple of reasons. First, I think sort of the story of excess savings that were built up during the pandemic and supportive fiscal policy didn't allow the full multiplier effects that you would normally see to flow through the economy. And then the second thing, which I actually think is less I would say less of a story, or let people have focused on it less, have been what I've called like the long tail of reopening. So, we focused a lot on, the fun part of reopening, which was travel and stores reopening, et cetera, and the impulse that had. But the healthcare sector was actually something that really helped the labor market at this point last year and helped to propel jobs growth. And I think that just helped support the economy and stop the recession process from filtering through.
I look at the consumer spending portion of this in particular, and that's such a sizable jump. And going back to what Tom was saying about the doom crew, we've been hearing so long about rising credit card levels. Is there percolating concern for the consumer in the U.S.? Are there things that make you worried at all, or does the read that we got yesterday allay some of that or put that to rest?
So, there are concerning elements, right? I don't want to be dismissive of that. Like, there's the labor market, the rise in unemployment is something that we should be focused on. And, like a lot of other economists, I'm looking at those initial claim readings every week to try and get a sense if the rise in unemployment is spilling over from just a lack of hiring into an increase in layoffs. So there are concerning elements, but actually I think, the takeaway is similar to what you had, David, which is that the consumer is well fortified. And by well fortified, I mean that we've seen a lot of the sort of cyclical areas within consumption soften. Right? So if you look at retail sales, for example, discretionary store sales have been very, very weak, and they were weak because of the rate hike cycle. But now they look like they're bottoming out. Now that doesn't mean they're going to come surging back, but it does suggest to me that there's sort of limited capacity for consumption to soften further. And I think that's a cause for optimism in terms of the ability of the consumer to sustain consumption growth in coming quarters.
David, help us look ahead to these data that we're going to get this morning. As John Tucker mentioned a moment ago, the Fed's preferred inflation gauge. What are you looking for in there, not at the headline level, but as we dig through those data? What's going to tell you if we are on the if the direction of travel that the Fed chair spoke about in Jackson Hole is clear?
Yeah, look, I'm like a lot of other people. We look to the CPI release and the PPI release, which if you tabulate it together, gives you a pretty good sense of what's going to happen with core PCE. I'll be looking at it specifically to the core goods component. I know that sort of has diminished in terms of how some people have been focused on the inflation backdrop. But for me, that matters because, there were signs earlier this year that it had been bottoming out and that potentially it was likely to start to move upwards. And so for me, that was the big upside risk to the inflation outlook. Now, those have diminished in recent months, but I'll just be looking for a continuation of that recent trend on core goods.
Part of your charm, David Doyle, out of Queen's University, I believe Canada, is you've got a more finance feel to your economics, which means nominal GDP matters. I did simple math, Q2 nominal GDP on revision over 5%. I mean, to me, the great misguess forward is if we get a more sprightly nominal GDP. Can we stay above 4% nominal GDP?
Yeah, I think we can, for at least around those levels going forward. Maybe not every single quarter, Tom, but certainly on a trend basis. If you have inflation that trends at around 2%, I think potential growth is roughly 2%. So there you have 4% or so on a nominal GDP growth basis. Now, look, I think the big thing here from an inflation perspective, and I want to tie that back to your earlier question on the consumer, is that inflation has come in more sharply than wage growth. And so as a consequence of that, the consumer now has positive real wage growth. And I think that's something that can sustain both nominal GDP and real GDP and actually adds to the confidence on the consumption front.
Thanks so much, David Doyle. Greatly appreciate it. With Macquarie there. That number yesterday, folks, not 2.93% redo for June 30 ending GDP. You wonder where we'll be September at 30. Back to school. Mm-hmm. For me, it's Wednesday. I'm going to go. She's a rising senior.
Thursday for public school students in New York, which is crazy.
I have to walk. Oh, Thursday?
Thursday.
I have to walk 30 feet behind her. First day of school on Wall Street. With Citadel Securities, I don't know who Jim Esposito's walking to Citadel with today, like the Esposito family, but congratulations to Jim Esposito working with Fortress Griffith. I mean, it's very cool. I mean, they brought him over from Goldman. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of first days going on.
Yeah. Your routine is you walk, you all go.
We walk to school. About third grade, you walk 10 feet behind. Then 20 feet behind. Widens. And we have a 1 block rule right now. Michael Barr knows this. The kids get over 15 and
you're so tall. Dead. You stand. Maybe you should make it 2 blocks.
Yeah.
We go and we take a photo.
Have you shopped for school supplies?
Oh no, we don't shop anymore.
No,
about 3. This will change, Mr. Gura.
Yeah.
They get to a certain age where they control Amazon. A whiteboard came in today for planning.
A whiteboard came in
Mrs. Keene goes, you could use one of these whiteboards on the refrigerator, Do you have a whiteboard at your house?
No, but now I feel like I have to get one. This is for what? Groceries? No.
No. This is for planning. Homework.
College
planning,
applications.
Time management.
Yes.
Our time management was, should we listen to the Doors or the Beatles? That was the basic extent. Anyways, we're thrilled to have a 3-day weekend here. Are we off Monday?
You are, Tom.
Eric, what do we have? We have special programming? I don't have to come in Monday.
The special program is if you do have to come in on Monday.
Michael Barr will be here Monday. Futures Up 24 with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, David, John. Vice President Kamala Harris has sustained the burst of momentum she brought to the presidential contest and is leading or tied with Republican Donald Trump in each of the 7 states most likely to decide the race. The latest Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll shows Harris now leads by 2 percentage points among registered voters across the 7 states. She is ahead by 1 point, a statistical tie among likely voters. We get more from Bloomberg's national political reporter Gregory Corti.
This is the poll that we did immediately after the Democratic National Convention last week. Pollsters tend to look for moments like that to see if there's a bounce. Traditionally, presidential candidates get a little bit of a boost in the polls right after accepting their party's nomination for president. And in this case, we didn't really see a huge bounce.
Bloomberg's Gregory Corti. The poll also found the vice president has narrowed or reversed Trump's advantage on key economic issues. A new survey comes as Kamala Harris sat down for her first interview since taking over the Democratic ticket just over a month ago. Speaking with CNN, Harris doubled down on her pledge to target price gouging. She addressed criticism over shifting positions on issues like her 2019 pledge to ban fracking. She says she backed off that stance and isn't going back.
I made that clear on the debate stage in 2020 that I would not ban fracking. As vice president, I did not ban fracking. As president, I will not ban fracking.
Meanwhile, former President Trump tried to flip the weird label back on Governor Tim Walz. Walz had a viral moment after characterizing Trump and his running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, as weird. At a town hall in La Crosse, Wisconsin last night, the former president defended Vance and himself.
He's not weird, and I'm not weird. I mean, we're a lot of things. We're not weird, I will tell you. But that guy is weird, don't you think?
Tonight, Trump is set to appear at the annual gathering of the conservative group Moms for Liberty. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, David, John.
David, I'm sorry. This is the time where we have to have obligatory Tigers talk because they're in the running for the wild.
Where's my Kleenex?
Red Sox Tigers now. Okay, Tanner's pitching for the Red Sox. Gino's pitching for the Tigers tonight. Undecided.
Yeah, we don't know.
For those of you nationwide and worldwide, if you're not into baseball, when the manager puts up undecided, that means you're really in trouble.
That means some dude from the stands might have a chance to get in the game. Oh, man. And they just came out. They won 7 in a row, and they just came off their first loss.
They're on fire.
Yeah, so.
They ran into a new kid last night, and the Angels took him under. But
still over 500.
This is, this is good. David, you loving this?
Loving it. I'm Googling
Detroit
the schedule here.
What they do is Detroit, David, has frontline pitchers, and they trade them to the Astros.
I see. That's the way it works. That's the routine.
That's what they're known for.
You stay up for these games?
I do not stay up, but I look in. I love MLB. I think MLB's doing it. It's not a perfect job, but MLB baseball, what kills me, Michael Barr, talk about business sports, that the Mets and the Yankees are blacked out. It's 2024.
I have one son who's a Yankees fan and one who's a Mets fan, which is, I think, on purpose. They've figured that. But anyway, we can't watch either game.
Can't watch it.
No.
Now, see, now you need to come out to my town in the Poconos because we can see both games.
Shamelessly trying to get an invite from Michael Barr.
He's got 800 acres.
800 televisions.
The deer and the antelope play. It's unbelievable.
He's not kidding about the deer and the antelope.
Futures up 20 right now. Market with a nice lift here. On this Friday, we've got some wonderful guests coming up. Brian Levitt, Invesco, next.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Wall Street set for a stronger open after a couple of days of wobbles. Yesterday, it's worth noting that Dow closed at another record high. Dow futures this morning 71 points higher. That's up 0.2%. S&P futures 19 points higher. And the NASDAQ futures right now up 123 points. Ulta Beauty falling. The cosmetic retailer trimming its sales forecast. This follows weaker than expected second quarter results. That ugly earnings report may have been the final straw. Intel discussing various scenarios, including a split of its product design and manufacturing businesses. Intel is up 3% pre-market. NVIDIA up pre-market after yesterday's 6% sell-off. Among the most read stories on the Bloomberg, ANZ Group Holdings, the Australian bank, is going to re-examine its alcohol policies after complaints of inebriated staff on the trading floor. There have been worries employees returning to the trading floor have been consuming unreasonable amounts of alcohol. Yeah. A problem.
It's a problem. Somebody asked me about this once. What was a 3-martini lunch like? And the fundamental difference, John.
Well, it was deductible, wasn't it? At least in the U.S.
Reto was great about it. We keep our Amex. But what's distinctive here, and you see it in Mad Men. If you go watch Mad Men, the early seasons, when they went in and had a Manhattan or a martini, they were teens weens.
Oh, they were smaller in size. Okay.
So a 3-martini lunch in those days
was really
like a
1.4
of these stupid, ginormous martinis today.
Tom gets his martinis in a pint glass.
Ah.
No, but it's yeah, I get it. I mean, I can remember many guys having a bottle of whatever in the drawer. I never did. But
never did.
I had a case of Jenny Cream Ale.
We moved from the well-fortified consumer to the well-fortified employee.
But I mean, it's like in the Valley, it's a fixture to these, high-tech companies, some of them, like, rolling around on roller skates and whatever, and having a tap in the lunchroom.
Oh, yeah, they have that. Yeah, we discussed that once. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Their portfolio analysts consolidate and analyze all your financial accounts on one powerful dashboard for free. That's Interactive Brokers Portfolio Analyst. Sign up for Portfolio Analyst at ibkr.com/free PA. Let me do that again. ibkr.com/free FREEP. Thank you, Interactive Brokers, for foundational support. Well-timed here. Brian Levitt joins us right now with Invesco to get a larger view. My question of the day, Brian Levitt, let me go to you on it. What is the character, the nature of this bull market?
It's actually broadening out, which is a good sign from where we were earlier in the year. Now, it's a market that is believing in the soft landing story. And I think the question becomes, obviously the question is soft landing, hard landing here as the economy slows. But when you step back and you go to the bull market story, to me, it's a bull market over the next few years, if not more, because that's what typically happens when inflation has peaked and when the Federal Reserve is done tightening.
Brian, how should we look back on what happened at the beginning of this month as we kind of push forward to another record here? We tend to forget what happened there in those first few days of August. How do we process or think about what happened there, and were there any warning signs embedded in all of that?
Investors also tend to forget each time that 5 to 10% corrections happen in most years, and you tend to recover in 3 months on average. So this is fairly consistent with history, if not maybe a little bit accelerated. Usually these things don't come out of nowhere. They tend to be the result of policy uncertainty. Typically, that policy uncertainty comes from the U.S. Fed. I suppose this time it came from the Bank of Japan and the unwind of the so-called carry trade. And yet, as soon as the Bank of Japan provided some further clarity, we raised rates once for the first time in decades. We're not going on an extreme tightening cycle here. The market's generally calmed. The other thing was, for whatever reason, it was a modestly weaker jobs report, although these things are being revised all over the place. And some investors thought that was a sign that the U.S. economy was cratering. So no, not indicative of things to come.
How do people, and Brian Levitt, folks, is very good at this. The boat's left the dock. I'm not exuberant. How do I get into the equity market? Don't give me this dollar cost averaging stuff. What do you go in and buy sector by sector? Do you buy an index fund? What's the Levitt approach to catching up?
It depends how people want to do it, but I would say a simple way, if you're concerned with the S&P 500 that you've seen valuations pick up and you have concentration, you can weight the 500 largest companies in the country differently. You can equal weight them. You can revenue weight them. And there's different ways to do that where you're or you can use dynamic approaches. We have dynamic multi-factor approaches where you can get exposure to the market, but differently. And you determine which way you would want to be exposed to the broad market. And the valuations will look different. The weightings will look different. Other things to do is, diversify within it. If you believe in the soft landing story, add things like value and small cap. So, this whole industry has been based on buy low, sell high. But if you look at how markets have worked historically, it's really been buy high, sell higher.
Brian Levitt, are you one to buy into that soft landing story in light of what we heard from the Fed chairman and the data that we've seen since and are looking forward to this week and next?
I am, although I would like to see the Fed get going. The reason why, with rates going up so high, it didn't have a big impact on the economy, at least not yet, because most American households have fixed rate mortgages and most businesses had locked in good terms on their debt. That doesn't last forever. So, at some point, floating rate loans start to hit on the business side and modestly on the consumer side. I'd like to see the Fed get going. I would have liked to have seen the Fed get going a handful of months ago. So the longer we stay tight here, the risks rise, but there's nothing in the data, very little in the data that suggests that this is a hard landing. And, I always look to the canary in the coal mine, which is corporate bond spreads, usually give you a warning sign that the economy is rolling over, and there's nothing in that suggests it.
Part of our agreement with Invesco Public Relations is we have to have the obligatory Ann Arbor question for Brian Levitt. Brian, do 100,000 people show up for Fresno when they visit Ann Arbor?
Yes. There'll probably be 110,000 people at Fresno. And I had a friend text me last night that he's going and bringing his son and wanted to know if I was available. And I'm not, but it would have been a fun weekend.
How do those things get booked? I mean, how does Michigan start the year with Fresno and not Ball State?
Oh, I don't know. You'd have to ask Wade Manuel or the athletic director. I don't know how these things get booked, but typically you have an at-a-conference game at home to start, maybe a couple, and then you move into the conference play.
Then you move into like real football. So do you see, are you set in your calendar January, Georgia, Michigan? I mean, is Levitt already there?
I'm going to start with November with Ohio State, and then we'll move from there. I think the Michigan fans playing a little bit with house money. I'll remind the listeners a national championship last year. And,
I forgot that. Excuse me.
Yeah, you forgot that, Tom.
Brian Levitt, thank you. I'm looking over to Invesco.
He's letting the data drive his decision making when it comes to Michigan football.
I mean, I'm looking over here to Invesco PR, and they're nodding their heads. Okay, we did enough of that with Brian. Brian Levitt, thank you so much. Of course, just great strategy out of the combine at Michigan and working with Invesco here on being in this bull market. David Gura, to me, the hardest part here is whether you're like wicked conservative 401k index fund or you're in the game, whatever, this post-pandemic bull market is different. I'm sorry.
I like that question that you asked, and I think we should ask it more often, sort of how you get in if you haven't, and looking at Brian's notes most recently. He still thinks it's the economy driving everything. Don't pay attention too much to this AI.
September 3rd next week. September 3rd, 92.9 FM Boston. We're thrilled. We're playing classic rock for Boston right now. Creedence.
It ain't me. It ain't me. I ain't no fortunate one. Some folks are born silver spoon in hand. Lord, don't they help themselves, y'all. But when the tax man comes through the door, Lord, the house look like a rummage sale. Yeah. It ain't me. It ain't me. I ain't no millionaire son. No. It ain't me. Yeah, me. I ain't no fortunate one. No.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in that fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Selected few are off today. Joining us, David Gura in for Paul Sweeney, John Tucker in for Lisa Mateo. Futures up 23, Dow futures up 87. NASDAQ launches up 0.7%. David Gura, it's a bull market in an election year. I guess it's better than a bear market for selected politicians.
Always, yes, but we'll see sort of how that plays out as we get closer. Only 2 months to go.
That's, to me, the key point, not said enough.
Yeah.
People have like 68 days to go or whatever
it's 2
it is.
months.
2 months.
And people are early voting is happening, I think, like in a couple of days, few days from now.
Mrs. Keene asked about that. It's like Pennsylvania, like soon.
Yeah, get it done. I don't know about New York City, but
In our 9 o'clock hour, we're really going to focus on this. We'll go to the White House. Justin Sink will join us on what President Biden is doing, and among other things, David Wasserman, the Cook Political Report, in the 9 o'clock hour as well. Let's jump right to it. We've got a wonderful guest on your need to be in the equity markets. Again, futures up 24. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, John Tucker.
All right, Tom, ahead of the Fed's preferred inflation print in 30 minutes, the S&P 500 on track to extend its fourth consecutive monthly rally. The Dow coming off another record close. Earnings, Dell reporting second quarter results. They beat particular strength in orders for AI servers. Lululemon Athletica reducing the full year forecast. Morgan Stanley, though, does see the revised guidance as achievable. There's also a suggestion this is the floor for Lululemon. Ulta Beauty trimming its sales forecast. Those shares, they are down. And Intel, that rose about just over 2% after Bloomberg reported the company discussing various scenarios, including a split. Right now, the Dow futures up 95, S&P E-mini futures up 25, the NASDAQ futures up 146. I'm not sure who's next. 493 companies in the S&P 500 have reported so far 80% of those delivering positive earnings surprises. And look at yields right now. The 2-year, 391. That's up 1 basis point. The 10-year, unchanged, 386. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. David, Tom.
Thanks so much, John. Greatly appreciate it. We're out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts on YouTube for intelligent conversations like this one now. Katie Kaminsky joins us now. Alpha Simplex here on trend in the market. Katie, I did a careful chart. I took nominal corn, a bushel of corn, and then I adjusted for inflation back like 30 years. Commodities are grim. Is the trend there lower, or do you catch a knife in the dark and try to go long any commodities, and particularly the softs?
Oh, that's a great point. This is the biggest pivot we've seen, especially this summer. Energies, we're seeing short signals. We're seeing short signals in the softs, except cocoa and coffee as an exception. So maybe go long those. But really, it's been a consistent theme this summer that, shorter signals are coming in the trends, and that makes me a little nervous.
Okay, but I want to get to equities in a moment. But Katie, the bottom line is you need to be on a trend to do trend. Is there a trend in corn or wheat or some of these? I mean, I get it. There's a trend in coffee. Starbucks is outrageous. But is there a trend in the softs that you can play, or do you just have to wait?
Well, I think the softs might still have a little pressure. I mean, we've definitely seen big moves in corn. It was a big positive trend in the short direction this year. There are differences. There are a couple commodities that are idiosyncratic. So like cocoa, coffee, we've been talking a lot about this month. I think it's up 20-something percent.
David, this is great. You got a woman with 4 degrees from MIT, and we're doing Farm Journal on corn.
Nominal corn.
I mean, where are you gonna do that except with Catherine Kaminsky? Ask her something about the stock market.
Well, Katie, you said something. Tom cut you off. He was so enthusiastic about his commodities play. You said you were getting nervous, and I wanted to make sure that you tell us what you're getting nervous about. What's making you nervous about the situation that you're seeing unfolding in commodities?
So what's really weird for me right now is I'm asking myself these weird questions about, are we in 2018 or are we dealing with COVID type trends? And what do I mean by that? We had 2 really big reversals in 2018 that looked like early August, where equity markets went back. So it was October and it was February. But right now we're seeing really strong signals in long fixed income and short commodities, which was a very consistent trade in a recessionary or pullback period like COVID and also 2008.
Tom urging me to ask a question about, it is 2024, by the way, not 2018, 2024, but let me ask you about the stock market.
Nailed that.
Something I said to Brian Levitt just a few minutes ago was, what should we take away from what happened earlier this month? Let me put that same question to you, sort of how you're processing the events of the early part of August, and what, if anything, that tells you about, not this month, which seems to be ending on a record, but going forward here, what it portends.
It definitely was a wake-up call for us in the systematic community because, as you know, volatility, it suggests that there is a little bit more risk than people are really willing to grapple with. And that's why I reference, Volpocalypse and these weird events where it's just sort of a bleep. Or is it really telling us something that, there is a higher probability that things could be challenging than we really want to price in? So I think that's what's interesting to me is the difference between sharp, big movements in the market and of course, real information. I mean, it was pretty violent. So it's surprising how much we're kind of forgetting about it already.
Katie, is NVIDIA on a trend? I mean, when you get a moonshot, I get it, arithmetic, it looks like a moonshot. But even logarithmic, semi-log, NVIDIA is not linear. It's not a trend. It's a beast of its own. Can you trend invest in NVIDIA?
Well, I think it's hard because if you look at NVIDIA from a trend perspective, you're going to see that it has, an exponential move. And at some point, though, that's what's hard is you don't have a lot of data when those trends extend to that type of higher, strength.
Yeah.
And so, it becomes very hard to predict a trend when it's extremely strong. It's much easier to predict trends when they're in the center of the distribution. Yeah. So I think that's why people are struggling. Like, what's next?
Okay, well, John Tucker's got a 201k. So let's go to the distribution here of mere mortals investing in index funds, Standard & Poor's 500. I think it's been a buoyant year. I mean, let me get that up right now, folks. 12 months trailing SPX is 23, make it 24% up. Do you ease back there? I mean, if the trend's extended and something as vanilla as that, what's the action that you would recommend?
So what's interesting is it depends on how you think about timeframes. And if you look at longer term timeframes, those trends look very clear. But what we are seeing is in the shorter term intraday data, you are seeing higher volatility, which suggests that the trend is weaker than you thought. And you're seeing correlations with stock markets and bond markets change, especially in the last month. So I have definitely seen trend signals weaken more recently, given the moves this summer and sort of the violent volatility that we've seen recently.
I'm a beat behind here, Tom. But Katie, a moment ago, talking about the systematic community. Katie, for a novice like myself, introduce me to the systematic community.
I love it. Yeah, no, the systematic, those of us who, really focus on measuring market moves and using data and analysis to determine the trend in markets. What that means is that we systematize the way that we invest. And as a result, it's really about measuring. And what we're measuring right now as a group is higher volatility and changing correlations.
I look, Katie, at the state of investment and the exuberance out there and the huge quantitative value that you have is wrapped around the emotion of exuberance. What does a Kaminsky exuberance indicator look like right now? How idiotic are we?
So it does worry me because I felt like we saw this in previous crises, because when I start seeing cross-asset themes that look very defensive, we've spent a lot of time studying past reversal periods. And what you do see is that equities always fall last. And then other asset classes sometimes seep in our behavior. So we may be exuberant about the stock market, but we go out and buy bonds because we know we might be wrong, so even though we don't want to admit it. Or we go and we see that commodity markets are in a massive downtrend. That tells us that global demand may be predicting something a little bit more soft.
Katie, thank you so much. And, I don't know if you understand this, David. Labor Day is the new year in the business world.
Okay.
It's like school. It's like,
reset,
September.
a moment of reset.
Michael Barr and I are having champagne into September 15th as we, we're rocking. Katie Kaminsky there with a terrific brief into the new year of economics, finance, investment, and international relations. Futures lift and lift further up 27. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, David, John. A Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll is showing sustained momentum for Democratic presidential hopeful Kamala Harris. The poll found 84% of Harris supporters expect her to win, compared to 79% of Trump voters who feel the same about their candidate. Meanwhile, Vice President Harris said addressing economic woes and bolstering the middle class would be her day one priority if elected. She made the comments in her critical first interview since capturing the Democratic presidential nomination. We get more with Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw.
The only real new thing we heard was her suggestion that she might include a Republican on the cabinet, which, again, is all about setting up that contrast with the way Donald Trump has framed his campaign.
Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw. In a position change, Harris told CNN she now does not want to ban fracking and said there should be consequences for people who cross the border without permission. Meanwhile, at a town hall in across Wisconsin last night, former President Trump repeated his new campaign pledge to have all in vitro fertilization treatments cost-free for the patient.
For people that are using IVF, which is fertilization, the government is going to pay for it, or we're going to get or mandate your insurance company to pay for it, which is going to be great. We're going to do that.
The former president has not provided any details on how he would ensure IVF treatments are fully paid for. A San Diego doctor charged as part of the investigation of the overdose death of Friends star Matthew Perry is expected to plead guilty in a federal court in Los Angeles. Dr. Mark Chavez is set to appear in front of a judge today. He has agreed to plead guilty to one count of conspiracy to distribute ketamine. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, David, John.
And Michael Barr, thanks so much. What does Labor Day mean, David Gura, to the political landscape? I mentioned yesterday, in the old days, there were state fairs, kissing babies out in Iowa and all that. That's long gone, is it? Is it like a big deal, or is it just a time for people to rest before the dash?
I think, just as you said, it's a reset for Wall Street. It's a reset for politics as well. I think both of these candidates know that, after this weekend, they have to really hit the ground running, and it's a solid push for these last 2 months. So I think the fairs are behind us. There have been some. Minnesota State Fair was last week. But yeah, I think it's a moment when they're going to focus squarely on what's ahead, and we'll see them on the trail a lot.
It's going to be interesting. And the debate's coming up. Remind me, September 10th? Do I have that
September
right?
10th in Philadelphia. I'll be there for that.
You're going to be there?
I'll be there. Yeah. And unlike the last one in Atlanta, I believe there'll be an audience of some sort. It was so strange in Atlanta to be on the grounds of the CNN headquarters in Atlanta, but you couldn't be in the room itself. I think that'll be different. My sense
It'll be like a more normal debate.
Yes, I think we're approaching normalcy.
It's good to know. We're learning as we go. Futures up 26. NASDAQ advances up 0.8% from New York City. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Global stocks on track for a fourth month of gains. Most data indicate the Fed has tamed inflation without tipping into recession. We are counting down to the Fed's preferred inflation measure. Europe's main stock index, worth mentioning, that rallied to a record as euro area inflation eased there. And after another record close, Dow futures indicate we're on track for another record. The Dow E-mini futures right now 101 points higher. S&P E-mini futures, they're up 27. The NASDAQ futures right now up 170 points. And Treasuries on course for the longest winning streak in 3 years. Among some of the individual movers, NVIDIA edging up higher in pre-market trading after yesterday's 6% drop. Some of the other tech names, including Marvell Technology, Autodesk, Dell Technologies, all being boosted by forecast-beating results. Twos right now up 1 basis point, 390. The 10-year unchanged, 385. The difference between the two, negative 5 basis points. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. David and Tom.
John Tucker, thank you so much. David Gura for Paul Sweeney. I'm Tom Keene. Thank you for joining us. Again, September 3rd, days away. We've got a countdown clock going on in here. 92.9 FM Boston, a ginormous signal from Mount Katahdin down to Block Island. 92.9 FM Boston, September 3rd. Look for that. Of course, we're out on YouTube. Thrilled with that. Record August for us. Good morning internationally. I just can't say enough about it. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. And I'm forced to say also, David Gura, the force behind The Big Take, which day to day. Do you have a theme for today? Do you know what the theme is?
I confess I don't. I'm working on a few for next week, but no, I'm still. I had a lot of lobster.
We'll do lobster.
Yeah, save that for later after the data.
Is lobster part of the inflation picture?
Is there an hugely expensive? It seems so.
Yeah, family of four. You got to remortgage the house. That's all there is.
That's part of the data.
Yeah. Jackie Bowie joins right now, and this is really, really well timed. First of all, the talk at Jackson Hole was the governor of the Bank of England is slimmed down. Can you report to us how the governor of the Bank of England is cut and chiseled, unlike me? I mean, that was the talk. You look great.
Yeah, all about cutting weight, so had to cut his waistline too. Yeah, it was noted.
The common feature here, besides Tottenham's already going down in flames, is the common feature is gloom on UK economy. Oops, we got it wrong. We're doing better than we thought. Mm-hmm. Gloom on the American economy. Oops, we got it wrong. We're doing better than we thought. Let's start with a why. Mm-hmm. Why is the Anglo-Saxon world doing better than we thought?
Well, I think part of it is just the way the data is collected, particularly in the UK. So we have an ONS, which has gathered the economic statistics, and they have said that they're struggling to collect accurate data, particularly on employment, which obviously then impacts growth. So that's pretty fundamental to understanding what's happening in the economy. But yeah, I think actually coming out of the pandemic, it just became really hard to get a better feel for those growth forecasts. And, when you have such extreme moves, during lockdown and then recovering from that, and it still feels like we're feeling the effect of that. So.
Here in the U.S., we've had this parlor game about when is the Fed going to begin cutting, and I guess now in the U.K. we're past that. So it's what's that pace of cuts going to be like? And as we look ahead to September 19th, which I note is, I think, a day after the Fed makes its decision, its next meeting. What is your sense of what that trajectory looks like now in light of the data that you were talking about?
Yeah, so you're right. Obviously, the UK and the European Central Bank have made their first cut already, and the Fed hasn't. But the general message coming from both those central banks is that this is not the beginning of a series of consecutive cuts. It's still very much caution, and that's really around whether inflation is hitting that target. So you saw the European inflation numbers this morning. Headline looks good, but if you look behind the number, that services sector inflation is still a cause for concern.
In France or Spain? I mean, we're seeing good inflation there, but there's service sector.
Yeah, service sector inflation is still about 4%.
Jackie Bowie here. We're commercial free now into the PCE inflation numbers. We'll see that in 9 minutes. We welcome all of you across the nation in her United Kingdom and, of course, around the world as well on YouTube. The quality of our disinflation. What will you want to look for at 8:30?
Yeah, I haven't actually gone through in detail what
Either have I. That's why you're here. The only one that's really looked at it is John Tucker.
Okay.
John, what does the quality of disinflation look like here?
Actually, I want to know what you pair haggis with.
Oh, neeps.
What is it?
Neeps.
What is that?
Turnip.
Oh, okay.
Turnip.
No, I mean drink. Like
whiskey.
Wine? Oh, whiskey.
Oh.
Okay. All right. got the answer to my question.
That's not in the inflation basket.
Welcome all of you on Apple CarPlay across Scotland as well. What do we look for in this inflation report in 9 minutes, Jackie?
Yeah, I guess we're looking for a continuation of some of the trends that we already, had seen before. It feels in the US that inflation is more under control than it is across Europe and the UK. So again, as we're making these comparisons, but I think the market is certainly expecting that we'll get good numbers and that we'll get the absolute clear line of sight into that first Fed rate cut.
Maybe pivoting back to Europe, as I was reading in this morning, I saw that Isabel Schnabel of the ECB gave a speech in Estonia. She talked about moving kind of gradually and cautiously, and it seems like there's been this build among European policymakers on that point to move in a more deliberate, again, more cautious way. Do you sense that as well when it comes to sort of the path of future cuts?
Yeah, and again, both the ECB and the UK have signalled that, and it's had quite interesting implications for the currency. With the difference in interest rates between the US, Europe, and the UK. So good for me being here. My pound's worth a little bit more, thank goodness. Been a long time coming, but that gap in the absolute rate of interest between the US and the UK should start to close, and then of course you'll see some weakness in sterling off the back of that. So all of that being kind of interlinked as well. Yeah.
A broader question in Europe, and I want to bring it over across the Atlantic to the U.S. with this inflation report coming in. Do we have all clear in greater Europe and the United Kingdom on the stagflation and high unemployment of 10, 15, 20 years ago? Have we moved from beyond that high unemployment trauma?
It's very interesting to ask that question right now, because I think if you'd asked it a year ago, we would have been slightly more optimistic to say yes. The issue we're in now, the theme again, fiscal deficits, and the UK has its budget on the 30th of October, and the expectation is huge tax increases and massive spending cuts. And I think that's potentially then when you start to get into that question about what impact will that have on the economy, unemployment, and inflation.
Did they mention that in the presidential interview last night?
No.
Huge taxes and spending cuts?
I
don't think we heard that
mention
last
of
night.
taxes, but not much about deficits. And I do suspect that'll bubble up more.
So interesting, in the election campaign in the UK, it also wasn't mentioned. It was only,
It wasn't? Okay, this is important.
Only
We're
once they
gonna
came into power. Yeah.
Stop the show. We were going to bring Ira Jersey in right now, but this is the moment of the show. Get this out, Bob, on single best idea today. Jackie Bowie with us. You're killing it with Chatham Financial of the United Kingdom. The Labour government, before the election, where they beat the Conservatives, the Tories, didn't mention higher taxes, reduce spending.
Absolutely not. In fact, explicitly said, we will not be increasing taxes.
That sounds very familiar.
Yeah, that's great. Are you advantaged by a short political process in the United Kingdom versus the agony David Gura has to live every day?
Yeah, well, certainly this time round, I don't think so. I mean, the shortest campaign, there was no campaigning.
At all.
I mean, from announcement to election, 6 weeks, no campaigning. I mean, it was so short.
Thank you for joining us in our
You're
studios.
welcome.
Really,
Good to
really
see you.
appreciate it. Jackie Boy, thank you so much, Chatham Financial today. To get ready for this important inflation number 4 minutes away, the true perspective on full faith and credit debt. Ira Jersey joins us now from Bloomberg Intelligence. Ira, the character of this PCE report, there's going to be some other, data as well. Actually, and I says Michigan at 10 o'clock, but personal income, personal spending, PCE, the core, and all that. What will you be looking for in 3 minutes?
Yeah, I'm going to be looking at the services sector inflation in particular, because we are expecting a little bit of a uptick in goods inflation, and certainly that's where the risk is going, following the election, because if you have tariffs and things like that, the goods sector could wind up seeing a reacceleration. But services is by far what's been driving inflation over the past year, so we really need to focus in on that. And along with that, we do get that personal spending number, Tom, that you just mentioned, and some of the detail of that could be really interesting, like how much services spending is going on and has that been moderating, because again, anecdotally, we've all been going out to restaurants and stuff, and even though prices are higher, everyone seems to be still wanting to eat out and use services.
Does a bond pro like you shift your view after a 3% statistic second revision ending June 30?
Not really. That's so backward looking, and certainly it was a little bit of a surprise that the consumption data in particular for the second quarter was certainly much higher. So it does suggest that the economy has been running at a better pace than certainly we thought, and certainly the data showed. How do we shift things then in our outlook? Well, not a lot, right? The market didn't move that much really on that news and the data. You still saw a moderation of inflation overall during the second quarter. So today's data is really important because it is this first read really on what third quarter GDP might be and the GDP deflator, so therefore inflation for the third quarter. So that's one reason why we're going to focus a bit on this number, not to mention the fact that it's only a couple of weeks before the next Fed meeting where they're going to adjust the dots as well as obviously cut rates by either 25 or 50 bips.
Ira, I want to pull back the curtain a bit here for our listeners and viewers. There's this healthy debate going on between Bloomberg Intelligence and Bloomberg Economics when it comes to optimism or pessimism about the U.S. economy going forward. If it's a pessimism off, you're squarely in the lead there. Explain why there is this disagreement and where you see potential difficulty here as we move from 2024 into 2025.
Well, quite frankly, our views are a little bit more nuanced than that.
Fair enough.
They think that we're having more weakness now, and I think we're going to have more weakness later, right? So it's more of a timing issue rather than a direction issue. So, but for the markets, the timing is very important, and I do suspect that as the Federal Reserve has waited to cut interest rates, and we have seen a reasonably modest slowing so far in the economy, there's a lot of people who are suggesting we're going to have a relatively soft landing. We're going to cut interest rates. There's right now we're priced for around a 40% chance that we're going to cut interest rates to only 4%, right? So only 150 basis points, 6 rate cuts, and then that's like that Goldilocks scenario. I'm more pessimistic than that. The economy tends to have momentum that goes one way. The Federal Reserve and the economy has really only ever had one real quote unquote soft landing, and I always think about that, and maybe this is my own bias coming out because that soft landing was 1994, and I had a problem finding a job out of grad school, right? So so maybe that has me jaded a little bit, but I do think that the economy will continue to slow in 2025, and as such that the Federal Reserve will continue on probably a reasonably modest but continuous cutting cycle through the end of next year, down to under 3%.
Ira Jersey with us here of Bloomberg Intelligence. We're going to look at the inflation report. We welcome all of you across the nation, around the world on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. And with that, we are here commercial free through this critical inflation report. And we'll move on. Tiffany Wilding of PIMCO to join us here in a bit. But right now, Ira Jersey with us. Let me frame out equities, bonds, currencies, commodities, futures lifting, not because of Ira Jersey, lifting because of tech. Some better feeling there. Futures up 26. NASDAQ up now a solid 0.8%. The VIX comes in a bit, 15.46. You'd look for that to be better than good here in a bit. In the yield space, 10-year yield 3.85%. We'll see where that goes. Jersey looking for lower yields forward. So the inflation report that Chairman Powell cares about, we'll get that to you right now. Waiting on the screen here on the Friday before Labor Day. Takes a few seconds longer. Personal income comes in higher than survey. Spending right on survey, an elevated 0.5%. PCE all on plan, but year over year core PCE disinflates a little bit off survey. Last month 2.6%. This month, 2.6%. We looked for an elevation there, but pretty much PCE on plan, where spending came in from 0.3 up to 0.5 on survey, and personal income did a little bit better. I'm waiting for the revised numbers. We'll get them out in a moment. In the markets, the VIX comes in a more bullish 15.25. Futures at up 26. Pretty much stasis. Maybe a little bit of a bid to the NASDAQ, up 0.9% right now. In Ira Jersey's yield space, I'm giving him time. What the racket here, folks, is I got to do this data check half as good as Karen Moscow while we let Ira Jersey and David Gura sort out the details. 2-year yield, 3.90%, a little bit higher yield, but the yield's not really moving all that much. I look at the 10-year real yield, 1.69%. Did I do okay there, David?
That was great. I mean, you walked. Do we get the revision? We got the revision there.
It's just
Real
coming
personal
in.
0.3%.
Yeah, and again, personal spending revision was a tick higher. This is important. We continue now with Ira Jersey of Bloomberg Intelligence. Ira, I guess it's on plan, on survey, and yet there's a lift involved, isn't there?
Yeah, so I think when you look at the headline data overall, and obviously we'll have to focus in on the details. Like I mentioned, I want to see what services spending was like and services inflation. But the economists got it right this time, I think, more or less in terms of the pace of inflation. Interestingly, we haven't really slowed much, right? So July didn't see a slowdown in inflation, but still 2.5% on headline and more or less right there on core inflation year on year has to give the Federal Reserve at least a little bit of comfort that they, if they cut interest rates and they go slowly, that inflation can continue to come down at least a little bit. The data that you mentioned, personal spending higher month on month, although in line with expectations, that's actually a decent sign, right? So the idea that we're having a soft landing is certainly playing out in this data for this 1 month. Will it persist? I don't think so, but at the same time, you have to take the incoming data and put that into your thinking and your entire outlook going forward.
Tom, I'm going to lob one at you if I can. I mean, you were out in Northwest Wyoming last week when the Fed chairman spoke, and we've said all morning, as we say all the time, this is the Fed's preferred inflation metric. How important is this reading to the Fed? I look ahead to next week, of course, and the jobs report, which strikes me as being so paramount in comparison to this one. What does this one mean to policymakers?
As Ms. Bowie of Chatham Financial said, she's looking at service sector inflation in Europe, France with disinflation, Spain with disinflation. Ira, here 3 minutes in, do you have a service sector statistic yet? Because I think that's what they're waiting for in Jackson Hole.
I'm waiting for some of the details to come out on the terminal, and it's the inflation number by sector is not out yet. But when I look at things like the personal income data at 0.3% and disposable income still up 0.3%, that's actually a pretty good sign.
I agree.
The fact that you have disposable income continuing to rise at a reasonable pace means that spending might continue to be robust, at least for the near term.
Ira, thank you so much. He's got to go dive into the data. Ira Jersey will publish for Bloomberg Intelligence here within the hour. He's also out with new forecasts, 3.66%, sort of a blended fan distribution of the 10-year yield. And that yield right now, pretty much unchanged, 3.86%. On the economics of the moment, Tiffany Wilding joins from the Pacific Investment Management Company, PIMCO, where she is the Managing Director, Economist, North America. Tiffany, I know you have to wait and dive into the data. The media frenzy here at 8:34 is unfair to you, but the feeling I get here is trend-based disinflation. Am I off the mark?
Yeah, I mean, what I would just say, taking a step back, when you look at a wide range of data, it is getting back to, some semblance of pre-pandemic. You look at headline inflation levels. There were some stickier pieces of underlying inflation, but now that labor market adjustment looks like it's happening more fully, those pieces of stickier inflation will be trending back to target. And so when you kind of look around the economy, things look, like they're getting back to some semblance of normal after the unique set of shocks that we had post-pandemic. And I think the thing that's not as normal that really stands out, obviously, is the policy rate. And obviously Federal Reserve officials understand that. Powell was very clear at Jackson Hole that they are going to start that journey back to normal, or at least kind of what they think could be normal. And and the pace of that is really going to depend on the data from here. And if we see economic weakness, then they'll go faster.
Tiffany, I really appreciate that. I'm kind of situating it in this moment, the way that we had Brian Levitt doing it, Katie Kaminsky earlier in the show. This notion that there has been this kind of post-pandemic readjustment that might not be as notable or as noticeable as the kind of initial adjustment that we had. Where are we in this cycle as you see it? When you look at what we're getting in terms of inflation data, pulling back more broadly to look at labor data as well, give us a sense of where this economy is as you see it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the labor market data has been, sort of confusing, if you will. The usual signs in the labor market of an underlying economy that's not doing well, i.e., the unemployment rate rising, I think is a bit of you have to kind of dig into the drivers of that indicator, because if you just looked at the labor market and you looked at nothing else, you would be incredibly worried about a recession. But if you look at a broader range of indicators of the economy, it looks like it's doing okay, right? It's a soft landing. If anything, the activity data, the growth data, the GDP data have been coming in better than expected. So I think you have to, kind of take a step back and, just again, understand that there's been a unique set of shocks since the pandemic. It's made indicators, usual economic indicators, more difficult to read. And I think the unemployment rate right now is one of those things.
I mean, difficult to read. I'm sorry. At a 3% real GDP ending June 30, I got a 5.5% amateur's look at nominal GDP led by Newport Beach, California. I mean, Tiffany, we've been wrong on the resilience and spirit of America. When you sit with cynics like Jerome Schneider and the other animals at PIMCO, are you trying to tell them it's not as bad out there as you think?
His words, not yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess the point that I would just really emphasize is that, when you look at the labor market, the things that have driven the unemployment rate higher this time is more about labor supply. Obviously, over the last few years, we've gotten a surge of immigration, and that has resulted in a higher unemployment rate because you just have more people in the labor force. You're not actually seeing layoffs. Now, certainly we could start to see more material layoffs across the economy. But, I would just say overall, the things still appear relatively strong. And usually when you have labor supply gains, that's actually good for the economy. More people are consuming, more people are working. It's not usually the time where you're going into recession.
Tiffany Wilding, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it this morning here. We're waiting for the revisions. Well, we got them out. David Gura mentioning real personal spending, inflation-adjusted personal spending, a lift to the revision, a lift to the on-track moment. Again, a feeling of the GDP, the 3% number that we saw yesterday. After the news, futures pull back a little, up 26. Now up 19, the VIX 15.54. Yields give me no information. Well, they're up. Actually, I stand corrected in the last 2 minutes. Yields a little bit higher, 3.87%. I want to lay out what we're going to do. We got a big political hour because David insisted on it. Oh. I'm going to talk to David Gura for a few minutes right at the end of this hour. David Wasserman, the Cook Political Report, must listen, whatever your politics. We'll do that in the 9. We've had here Jimmy Bowie with us, Tiffany Wilding with us. Cam Dawson will be with us here in a moment for an extensive discussion, the courage to be in the stock market or the confidence to be in this stock market. Futures up 22. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, David, John. There is brand new Bloomberg News Morning Consult polls that are out right now with the results showing Kamala Harris is leading or tied with Donald Trump in each of the 7 states most likely to decide the race. Bloomberg's Nancy Lyons has more on the growing optimism about her chances to win the White House.
Presidential candidates typically get a small bump of support following their party's conventions. But for Kamala Harris, she saw her bump right after getting into the race, according to Eli Yoakley with Morning Consult. One sign of that excitement is the optimism among Democrats about a Harris victory. The poll found 84% of Harris supporters expect her to win, compared to 79% of Trump voters who feel the same about their candidate. As the campaigns enter their final sprint, Harris's challenge will be to figure out how to maintain that edge. In Washington, Nancy Lyons, Bloomberg Radio.
The poll also shows Harris leading Trump by 2 percentage points among registered voters in the 7 states likely to decide the election. The poll shows Harris ahead by 1 point among likely voters, a statistical dead heat. Kamala Harris was on CNN last night alongside her running mate Tim Walz. In the first major TV interview since winning the Democratic nomination, she promised to help boost the middle class on day one while defending President Biden's economic record.
Well, first of all, we had to recover as an economy, and we have done that. I'm very proud of the work that we have done that has brought inflation down to less than 3%.
Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump was on the campaign trail in Wisconsin last night and earlier Thursday in Michigan. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, David, John.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Again, futures up 26. They come down up 19. They're back up 23. It's the Friday before Labor Day. Our team has just done a wonderful job. I can't say enough about the intelligence of the conversations through all of this week. As we had Ketie Kaminsky in earlier with Alpha Simplex, wicked quantitative, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, think Andrew Lowe. She knows where Epsilon is. Someone with the same prodigious chops is Cam Dawson, NewEdge, who joins us right now. I think also with a much more almost Barron's-like focus on, hey, here's the confidence to be in the market. Thrilled to have you here. Thank you for coming on a Friday. I mean, before Labor Day. I mean, Tucker's working Monday if you'd like to come in.
Look, it gave me a chance to wear my white. The last chance.
Lovely. Who are we wearing today?
Well, it is a sartorial hook slide of white into the Labor Day holiday.
Very good.
Yeah.
Good. Gura serving lobster rolls in the 10 o'clock
Great, yes.
hour. Cam Dawson, how do I have confidence to be in the market? You're wonderful at this. Frame the belief construct to own equities now.
The belief construct is that the 12-month forward EPS estimate continues to move higher in this market. And if we look at over the last 5 years, that has been the North Star guiding light of what
Earnings.
to do with equities. Exactly. Which is that as long as that is lifting, then all of this volatility and oscillation that we see in the short term should be something that we can look through. Now, if that starts to level off, meaning the growth rate in earnings starts to slow, that's when you get a choppier sideways market. We do think that that's a risk for 2025, but not something that necessarily says run for the hills, get out of your equities, take big capital gains.
My theory on this is corporations adapt. I think we're seeing it in spades, whether it's a resurrection of Dell Computer, name whatever you want. I mean, Intel with this huge news today from Bloomberg News that they may do some form of gross restructuring as well. Day to day at NewEdge, are you seeing corporations adapt? I am.
They say that necessity is the mother of invention, and that is exactly what we think that we are seeing, given the fact that, look at the backdrop of pricing power. If we go back to 20 and 21, you had massive pricing power that allowed companies to raise prices, and that drove margin expansion. That's gone. Companies are no longer able to push price to customers, which means that they have to get margin expansion out of invention, out of innovation, out of applying new technologies. Now, the challenge we see in 25 to get it back to earnings is that you already have a big amount of margin expansion priced in. So it just means that companies have to deliver on those high expectations in order to get to the 14% growth that is projected.
One of the things I've learned on this show is it's good to crib a question that Tom has asked, reword it slightly, and put it to another guest. So I'll do that. We had Katie Kaminsky on. He asked about if you can extrapolate any kind of trend.
Don't feel bad about
NVIDIA.
that. I used to do that with Ken Pruitt. Ken Pruitt would ask a question, and I would just reframe Ken's question.
Yeah.
It made me look brilliant.
Rephrasing it and reframing. When you look at NVIDIA, is there any kind of trend that you can apply to that or that you see? It's something of such focus. What more can we make of that, if anything?
Well, I think Katie was so intelligent in talking about the parabolic move that you have seen in the stock, which makes it really hard to sustain. The thing with parabolic moves is that they can last longer than expected, but as Walter Deemer says, when they go up in a straight line, they typically go down in a straight line. So it's something that is hard from a trend basis.
You don't remember 2000. No one in the studio, no one in the control room remembers 2000. That's why we're playing classic rock today. Don't play Journey today. A guy spit out his coffee yesterday when I played Journey. Cam, Journey's a band from California. Cam, I'm looking here, and Wally Deemer, of course, is a legend on this, but the answer is trees to the sky. 1999, 2000, without profit. This time around, I got free cash flow. That's a distinction.
You do, but you always have to be aware of when stocks are running ahead of what the earnings estimates have been being revised higher themselves. So if you look at a name like NVIDIA, in prior reports, each time that they would report, the forward guidance would go up by 30 cents or 40 cents. This time, it's about 5 cents. Is that the end of the world? No, but it does mean that we should probably lower our expectations for the pace of returns simply because the pace of earnings revisions higher are starting to slow. The issue would be if the stock keeps going up, even as earnings slow down and the revisions higher, that's when you get the trees growing to the sky, the issues with valuations being far too stretched.
At this point in the earnings season, are we talking too much or focusing too much on tech? What else is sort of drawing your attention, or what is tech distracting us from?
I apologize. It's such a Brooklyn question.
Curious.
Only people from
let's
Brooklyn
go Luddite. Let's go old school. What other sectors?
But see, I speak that language. So I think that the interesting thing about this earnings season is the reaction of the stocks in the backdrop, is that we've seen some of this weakness in tech start to build. Tech traded below its 50-day moving average yesterday. It's been deteriorating on a relative basis. What's been winning? The 493, the equal weight index. So if we look at earnings estimates going into 2025, what you can see is the MAG 7 is expected to decelerate a lot, but the overall market is expected to accelerate, which effectively says the 493 is about to have to carry all of that weight in the earnings growth.
In conservative 3-year short-term money, what we call retirement plans, am I more index or more active right now?
I think you have to be both. It's not a black or white, it's a sliding scale. In indices that are highly concentrated, it does not pay you to pay for active management. In indices that have a great deal of dispersion, you can pay for active management.
So 2 industries, give me an example.
So the difference between the growth sector and things like small cap and international and value. We think that there's a lot more opportunity to outperform and get alpha in those indices, small cap, international value, where you have a lot more dispersion between winners and losers.
When you're great at this, will international get a jump start off legitimate weak dollar?
It has been in a relative downtrend for the past 15 years. The weak dollar is an absolute necessity for international to be able to outperform. The only time you've had big international bull markets is in big dollar bear markets. The only problem is that it has to translate to earnings. The most fascinating stat is that if you look from 2007 to today, U.S. earnings in the S&P 500 are up 150%. International EFA index, they're flat. The emerging market index, they're still down versus 2007. It's an earnings story, not a valuation story.
One more question, David.
Let me go back to today's data. Let me go to today's data, to what you heard at Jackson Hole. This is a Fed that has been, for these last few years, so united. There has been such unanimity. Do you sense that the remarks that we heard from Fed Chair Jerome Powell are widely shared? What are you listening for in the commentary that we're going to get before this meeting on the 16th and 17th of September?
Did you see what she wrote? Did you see her research note?
Did I?
John Farrow introduced me to Love Island.
Yeah.
And the British Love Island is different.
Do you watch Love Island?
No, Farrow taught me.
You
that
read his Cliff Notes.
in 90 Day Fiance or something.
Yeah.
Farrow, all this garbage from London, Farrow introduced me to. And so Cam doesn't have Love Island. She's got Dove Island.
Dove Island. Yeah, and that Jay Powell may be the only bombshell on Dove Island. It's really interesting. The one word missing from that Jackson Hole speech was patience. And that's the one word you've heard from every other Fed voting member, which just means that Powell is thinking, I could do 50. Other voting members are saying, no, slow and steady, 25 basis points, more evidence, we can take our time.
Cam Dawson, thank you so much. NewEdge here. Wonderful brief. I love what we're doing here, folks. We go commercial free across much of this important economic hour, and we do that with Tiffany Wilding of PIMCO. Jamie Boeing, thank you so much from Chatham Financial, United Kingdom. And of course, Cam Dawson, always on the confidence to participate in this market. I do want to do a shout out to Commonwealth and their commitment to Bloomberg Surveillance and all of our economic data and the leadership of Michael McKee. Bloomberg Surveillance, always brought to you by IBKR Financial Advisors. Switch to Interactive Brokers. For lowest cost global trading and turnkey custody solutions, no ticket charges, no conflicts of your interest at ibkr.com/RIA. We've got an eventful 9 o'clock hour program note. Pulling a short straw out at the US Open today. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovic, they will be there always. It's a tradition that we do. Bloomberg Radio moving out in the vicinity of Long Island to the US Open. Big upset there yesterday.
Long Island.
Big upset
Yes,
yesterday.
I saw that.
Huge in the men's. And they'll be there today, but to prepare themselves. I don't know, is Stenovic wearing shorts in the 10 o'clock hour?
I hope so. Well, I don't know about the 10 o'clock hour, but I hope he wears it out there. I mean, it's
You know.
like it's
Oh,
gonna
no,
be
he wears
hot.
it out there.
No, it's been
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Like, it's moderating.
It's moderating. It's going to be a
Had the windows open
perfect
last
tennis
night.
stand. Yeah.
Beautiful night for sleeping.
Yeah, beautiful
It's
night.
a shame we couldn't do any.
Tim Stenovic and Carol Massar, the 10 o'clock hour will drive you forward here.
I
Futures.
feel like we need to go to the US Open. Maybe they can get us into their box.
Yeah, they don't. I don't know. I don't know what the drill is. I mean, I called up the Open and I said 2 years ago I sat right in the front row because there's all these tickets that are sold but they're not sold.
Yeah.
And so I had a ticket and the guy, he was a fan, blah blah blah, and he puts me in the front row. I'm in the front, like the front row,
On
right
the
by
Jumbotron,
all the
everything.
swearing at the umpire.
I remember the former mayor, David Dinkus. He just lived for that. Is that like a political scene at all?
Oh yeah,
It's
it's a
the
scene.
Open?
It's a total scene. Yeah, Sweeney goes. They have a honeydews thing, which is a drink Gura and I don't drink.
Grey Goose, right?
Yeah, it's Grey Goose and pink. It's like a cosmopolitan.
Pink.
It's a
Capri
cosmopolitan.
Sun and
Right now, we're going to turn to David Gura here to get ready for a strong 9 o'clock hour. It's not a normal year, and we have not talked about President Trump. The uproar over the Arlington Cemetery thing, I don't want to go into the details of it. I think it's all over cable TV now. Those for Trump, those against Trump, et cetera, et cetera. Is it a distraction, and will there be other distractions along the way?
It's a distraction, but I think that it's something about which many people feel quite passionate. That somebody who's lost his life defending this country overseas deserves to have the sanctity of Arlington National Cemetery, the most sanctified, hallowed ground in the United States, perhaps, preserved. And that's why this has become
Admiral
a tempest in
Stavridis
something more.
was blistering out on Twitter. He did not mince words.
And we have seen the Defense Department, the Army issue statements of their own that are uncharacteristic and quite pointed as well. Look, this is in the crucible of accusations about Vice President Harris's running mate and his service. So it's become, I'd say, quite nasty. A distraction, yes, but something that's certainly taking up a lot.
Here's
of
my headline for Labor Day. I'm serious, folks. What will Sue do? David Gura introduced me to the new campaign strategy that Mr. Trump has, led by Sue. What do they do if he's not listening to Sue? Who is Sue?
They
Why don't
need
you give us a brief here?
this. He has surrounded himself by very capable political advisors, and he has to listen to them for this to be an effective campaign, for him to have any shot at this. And you look at the polling numbers, there's a lot in there that would worry the former president as he moves forward here. But there is this distinction, which the vice president's campaign is eager to draw, between new ideas and old ideas. And a lot of what you're hearing from the former president on the campaign trail is a reiteration of what he said in the last campaign and the one before it. He's not sitting this one out. He's on the trail. He is doing these big events. He is tweeting and posting on Truth Social as well. But they want him to be focused squarely on the issue of the economy, principally, front and center. He is not doing that. He is taking the bait. He is opining on many things beyond that.
So what does Susie Wiles do? I mean, you're in this world, David. Is she having a tantrum down at Mar-a-Lago, or has she been completely pushed aside?
I don't know that she's having a tantrum, but I think that she's encountering a Donald Trump that many others have encountered before, and that is he is kind of immune to the wisdom and advice of those who think that they know better and perhaps likely do know better about what should be happening here. And I mentioned Labor Day being this reset moment for the campaign. I think that it will be crucial to see if anything changes about the way his campaign is being waged after this holiday.
Well, look at the benchmarks. I mean, lobster rolls with Gura out in Brooklyn tomorrow. And then September 3rd, 92.9 FM Boston.
At noon.
At noon. Is it noon? I didn't know that.
Noon.
Oh, at noon. Very good.
Set your clock.
Very glad someone's up to speed. John, you didn't brief me on that.
Yeah.
Noon.
Yeah.
I'm not.
I'll be listening.
Yeah.
I gotta wonder the last song, the last classic rock song.
Oh, it's got to be Aerosmith. I mean, it's Boston.
Oh, I was thinking Zeppelin, but
Zeppelin.
No, it's Boston. Aerosmith. Real music. But the whole point here, folks, and then we get to September 10th, which is his debate.
Big debate.
David Gura for Bloomberg News will be at the debate. Right now, classic rock, my favorite. Joe Walsh, James Gang, Boulder, The Sink.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about that ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Bloomberg Surveillance, Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, selected of us off. I can't remember which. John Tucker's in the studio. That's a good, wonderful thing. Tucker leading our coverage on Monday. David Gura with us. After a morning in Maine, he did the whole Robert McCloskey thing up in Maine. Did you survive Maine? Did you do blueberries?
Yeah,
and
no, we had the
roll?
Maine blueberries, lobster roll, a lot of oysters.
Was it on a service sector basis, and like the airlines and the restaurants, was Maine booming? Was the tourist racket booming?
Maine was booming. Everyone, there are these shirts they wear, which is that you send you that don't come to Maine. They want to keep you out if you're a tourist. But to be fair, there are a lot of tourists there. We went to Monhegan Island. Beautiful.
Yeah.
You asked. I remember I talked to you. You said, "Are the leaves beginning to turn?" Not yet. The water was cold, but beautiful up there.
Monhegan is the island where the deer just walk up to you because they're not used to people.
And a lot of puffins, although we saw none, which I was kind of mad about. But about 10 miles off the coast, we went out there by boat, took about 45 minutes. And,
did you see whales?
No whales, although there are often whales spotted. I took a whale watch off of Sheepshead Bay about a month ago, right here in Brooklyn, and we saw three humpback whales.
There are humpback whales. I mean, you can't swing a stick without hitting one off the Jersey coast.
Wild.
Yeah, breaching
there. Tons
Well,
of
this is a great thing. I had the honor of talking to Arthur Levitt about a cleaner New York harbor a number of years ago, and where New York harbor was unanimal, and now there's a real biome out there. I mean, there's like fish and the whole thing out of New York harbor.
I don't know if it's because it's
really
cleaner. When they jump out, they breach. Yeah. And I don't know. You can hear them. Some of them are saying, "Get me out of here."
Yeah. Well,
like maybe it's too warm.
As I learned on that whale watch, you can smell them before you can see them. The breath. Bloomberg Cetology report here on a Friday before Labor Day.
And then there are the much rarer right whales, and you'll see those. You know those because their spout is like a double. It looks like a V shooting up. So that's how you can distinguish between the two types.
V-shaped curve. It's like I feel like Bloomberg Surveillance today brought to you by Mutual of Omaha. Thank you for that, John Tucker. Justin Sink is going, why am I here? Futures up 26, off of the news, PCE, ebbed a little way, still up 17. NASDAQ was up 0.8%, now up 0.7%. He is our White House correspondent, and things have changed. Justin Sink joins us right now. Justin, what has changed? It's 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Well, I think there's a lot of changes both, at the White House itself and in the race overall. So, at the White House, it's a completely different posture from just 5 weeks ago when Joe Biden dropped out. There's been significant staff turnover as people exit to either find outside opportunities or go join sort of super PACs and affiliates. The president himself has been on vacation now. This is his second straight week. I don't know if he's seen any whales, unfortunately, but he has just kind of scaled back his cadence overall. And I think it's mostly because they're trying to stay out of the way of Kamala Harris. And as Bloomberg's swing state poll that came out today showed, it's working. It was a sort of undeniably great poll for Kamala Harris. Shows her sustaining and building on that momentum that she got from taking over the ticket from Biden, and now has either a tie or a lead in all the major swing states. So at the White House, I think a lot of what they're trying to do is just bolster her where they can, but otherwise stay out of the way.
Justin, you mentioned that cadence, and I wanted to ask you about President Biden's ambitions and watching that conversation last night between the vice president and her running mate and Dana Bash of CNN. There was a lot of due deference, too, in mentioning of the current president. What are his aspirations going forward? So once he gets back from this vacation, gets back from California, comes to the East Coast again, what does he hope to accomplish? How clearly articulated is that mission or that vision by the White House?
Yeah, I think there's a couple elements to it. One is sort of legacy protection. I think the president's going to go out and make the case for why his first term was a success, even though it's something that voters don't necessarily agree with. And there's two reasons for that. One is obviously self-interested, but the other is because it helps Kamala Harris. And you heard her in that interview last night. She didn't back away from the economy. She didn't back away from the way that he's conducted foreign policy. And foreign policy is probably the second major focus for the president right now. The sort of hostage ceasefire deal in the Middle East is the last big legacy item sitting there. And I think that's going to be a big focus for him, especially as he might ramp up some farewell foreign travel in the last few weeks.
All right, Justin Sink with us right now. David Wasserman to be with us here later on in the hour. Wrapped around some good equity coverage. Futures up 16. I'm asking a question to both you. I want two answers. Justin Sink, David Gura. Are you supposed to campaign on policy, David Gura?
Yes, although there is this kind of move to the middle, as we talked about a little bit earlier
Richard
in this
Nixon
show.
didn't campaign on policy. It was the whole crime thing. That's what he knew would get votes.
This is such a strange campaign in so many ways, obviously paramount in the sense that it's moving very quickly here, and it's a very short, compressed campaign. And so we have seen the Harris campaign putting out more policy positions. I won't say policy papers, but more definition there. There has to be a nod to policy, and herein lies the trickiness of this campaign. The Democratic campaign is differentiating itself, at least somewhat, from the incumbent president.
So, Justin Sink, you're at Chicago, buried in American politics and government. You're studying this. In the old days, did they talk policy in a campaign? I would suggest they didn't.
And I think that as much as Bloomberg readers and listeners want to hear about Vice President Harris's policy. That's not what that campaign is really interested in forwarding. They just keep hammering the idea of joy and of change. And it's not different from hope and change that we had with Barack Obama. There's policy underpinning it. They've made a push on housing. They've made a push on helping the middle class address some costs. But genuinely, what they're trying to present to the American people is this idea that, hey, we are turning the page on a decade and a half era of Donald Trump and Joe Biden that you've frankly grown tired of.
Justin, when I look at that polling that you mentioned a moment ago, yes, the headline numbers are astonishing, how well the vice president has carried that momentum forward. But I looked deeper at some of these issues, and I think the thing that surprised me the most, and I imagine delights the Harris campaign, is what they hoped would come to pass. That is, Vice President Harris could campaign on the economy, and voters would, if not forget, seemingly forgive the fact that she has been part of this administration in the White House. I mean, you look at sort of how they feel about inflation, how they feel about the economy. They're giving her maybe not a pass, but more of one than they were giving President Biden when he was running for re-election.
For sure. I mean, on the question of housing, which is obviously a key issue and a big struggle for Biden, they give Harris a 4-point advantage over Trump. There's a 7-point advantage on who helps the middle class more. And it really suggests that people are willing to sort of put it all aside and say Harris we see as a totally different candidate, even as she's continuing to champion a lot of his policies.
Okay, I'm going to ask the question everybody wants to know. I don't care what your politics are. John, how many polls were released in the last 24 hours? Like 8?
I think about 600 polls.
About 600 polls in August.
That's within the margin of error on that guess.
We're polled out. I mean, I'm sorry. Great polls. Love what Iowa does. Love what Bloomberg does. They're all great. Do you actually study the polls, or are they just noise to a pro like Justin Sink?
Well, I think to me the biggest question is, are we in a honeymoon or not, right? A lot of the polls are saying the same thing right now. But Kamala Harris is coming off of a convention that was really great. And while these polls are good, they're not runaway. And so you got to really put a grain of salt in all of this, which is we're within the margin of error on, nearly all of these things. And this race is going to go down to a razor's edge. So while it's, you'd rather be Harris than Trump right now, I don't think anybody's kind of saying that this thing's over.
Justin, thank you so much. Justin Sink at the White House, at our news bureau in Washington. We say good morning to 99.1 FM in Boston, September 3rd, 92.9 FM, Boston. We're moving Justin Sink up to Boston. That's what they ought to do. Ian Lingen published this moments ago. BMO Capital Markets on today's PCE data, quote, the data is consistent with the Fed's messaging regarding a September cut, but doesn't make the case for 50 basis points. Futures up 26, now up 19. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, David, and John. Vice President Kamala Harris defended shifting away from some of her more liberal positions in her first major television interview of her presidential campaign. But she told CNN her values have not changed. Sitting with her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Harris was asked about changes in her policies over the years, specifically her reversals on fracking and decriminalizing illegal border crossings.
There should be consequence. We have laws that have to be followed and enforced that address and deal with people who cross our border illegally.
Meanwhile, Kamala Harris is leading or tied with Republican Donald Trump in each of the 7 states most likely to decide the race. The Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll conducted across battleground states after last week's Democratic National Convention found the vice president has narrowed or reversed Trump's advantage on key economic issues and established herself as more trusted than her rival to protect personal freedoms. Harris now leads by 2 percentage points among registered voters across the 7 states. She is ahead by 1 point, a statistical tie among likely voters. Former President Trump was on the campaign trail in Wisconsin last night and earlier Thursday in Michigan. Trump said if reelected, he would make in vitro fertilization treatments free. Trump said either the government or insurance companies would cover IVF treatments.
We will also allow new parents to deduct major newborn expenses from their taxes so that parents that have a beautiful baby will be able. So we're pro-family. Nobody's ever said that before.
Trump didn't detail how he would fund his plan or how it would work. The Labor Day weekend rush is now well underway. It will be busy at U.S. airports. The TSA is estimating 17 million people will be screened over the long holiday weekend. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, David, John.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. David Gura and Tom Keene. We've got some good equity coverage coming up here. We have a very special guest scheduled. Our people are talking to her people. We'll see if we can get her in. Mystery guest as we're having here. We'll see if we can pull that off. And then we go to David Wasserman, the Cook Report. David Gura, Charlie Cook, emeritus, and he's done such a good job of handing this must-read Cook Report over to Amy, over to David. It's a home run. Charlie Cook's essay, Adversity Will Come, Can Harris's Team Deal with It Better Than Trump's? It was a Charlie Cook tour de force.
A wonderful piece. I hope you put it out there on social media, Tom, and I hope others read it. But as you say, Charlie Cook's such a font of wisdom, and as you mentioned, Dave and Amy taking over the shop there. Charlie's still writing pretty frequently, but just really solid work about what Justin Sink was describing a moment ago. That is, this race is going to be decided on a razor's edge. It's going to be incredibly close, and it's going to be the professionalism of the campaign that's going to make a huge difference.
But he said, look, the popular vote, Harris is going to run it up in New York, Illinois, California, and 6 other states I don't know that you know. It's an electoral count. How is Mr. Trump doing with the electoral count?
Well, he's not going to be happy with that Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll, and with all deference to what you said about there being kind of a ton of them, I think one of the things that our colleague Greg Cordy mentioned in his analysis of that poll is that it opens up a lot more options now for the Harris campaign. If you look at Georgia, for instance, and you see how things are shifting there, you look at North Carolina, it is opening up doors that were previously foreclosed, and that's a good sign for the Harris campaign and not a great sign for the Trump campaign.
In North Carolina, when Harris goes to Chapel Hill, doesn't mention Duke? And when she goes to Duke, she doesn't mention Chapel Hill.
You can't. That's the rule. That's the simple rule. She's been there a lot.
We'll have much more. David Gura and Tom Keene, good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with his Bloomberg Business Flash. The Fed may be getting more confident to cut, and the soft landing scenario looks like it is playing out. The Fed's preferred inflation index, if you take it on a 3-month annualized basis, advancing 1.7%. That's actually the slowest this year. S&P 500 poised to trim this week's losses. It's on track to notch a 4th straight monthly advance. Right now, the S&P futures 21 points higher. That's up 0.4%. The Dow futures 78 points higher. This comes after another record close for the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And the NASDAQ E-mini futures up 158 points. That's a rise right now of 0.8%. As for yields, the 2-year, which is more policy reactive, 2 basis points higher. It's at 391. The 10-year, 386. The inversion, negative 5 basis points between the two. Most active day after NVIDIA's more than 6% slide. Its shares pre-market, they're up just about 1.1%. Intel working with investment bankers discussing various scenarios, including a split of its product design and manufacturing businesses. And shares this morning of Intel up 6.1%. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. David and Tom.
Thanks so much, John. Greatly appreciate it. This is a joy. Nancy Curtin is with Alti. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Alti Tiedemann Global, yeah.
Alti Tiedemann Global, which is a venerable institution, huge experience here. And not only, the usual strategy, what's the Fed going to do in that, but the state of our financial system, the products that we have, how we save for retirement, whether it's alternatives or more traditional products as well. Nancy Curtin joins us this morning, Global CIO to me it's always Tiedemann, but it's Alti Tiedemann, I guess I'm supposed to say today. Where are mutual funds in 5 years or 10 years? You were at Schroeder's 8 cups of coffee ago. It's a whole new world. It's like a whole new world after all. Tell me where mutual funds are in 5 years.
So I think if you're thinking about a wealth portfolio, of course you have equities and mutual funds, but you're also going to have passive exposure to markets as well. Pretty cheap. If you're going to buy a mutual fund, you've got to make sure you are really getting that alpha, that incremental outperformance to justify the fees. But look, it's not just about mutual funds. There's a lot of things going on in the alternative spectrum, in private credit, in infrastructure, and real estate. And those are areas that we're giving our clients exposure to as well.
So I can go to ETFs in the Eric Balchunas world, but in alternatives, what am I giving up for a lack of liquidity? I mean, to me, it's this great free lunch as everybody tries to cash out. They can't cash out.
Well, I think, first of all, there's a transformational change happening, which is many of the alternative asset classes like private credit and infrastructure are now being offered in semi-liquid form. So you're not getting locked up for 10 years. And if you can get a 10 to 12% return in private credit, that looks pretty attractive versus high yield at around 7%. So you're getting a premium return.
Right.
Yes, it's semi-liquid as opposed to daily liquidity, but I would argue that the credits that you're underwriting are higher quality than you're getting the high yield marketplace. So better credits, higher yield premium, and semi-liquid.
Is that better credit? 10 to 12 is a nice large number off high yield and corporate and full faith and credit. Is it generated by leverage?
There is leverage, you're right, because it's direct lending, but you're lending to companies, at least the way we have invested, with $250 million of profitability. These are large companies. They've got great interest coverage. There is a bit of leverage in those returns, but broadly, we think that the yield premium justifies that illiquidity, which, by the way, semi-liquid is not exactly 10-year illiquidity. And anyway, you want to diversify your portfolio. You want to have other things and other sources of return because that's how you drive resilience in portfolios.
Pulling back, I just want to get your sense of where this market is at right now. We were joking about Labor Day coming up and the slowness and high volume of August. Where do you see things now? And when you look at the kind of volatility that we saw at the beginning of this month and indeed what we've seen here and there since then, how are you looking at the market more broadly?
So first of all, we think volatility continues, right? I mean, we think the playbook of July is what we'll see at the end of into the end of this year, which is a rotation from the tech sector. Not that the tech sector gets get sold completely, but a rotation to other parts of the market. That means people have to sell what has performed well and reposition, and that brings volatility. Secondly, volatility and data going back to the 80s, rises in the last couple of months of a presidential cycle because not us, but shorter term traders may try to position for different policy planks, etc. So that is a feature, but broadening in market participation is our key theme.
I got one more question. Don't be a stranger. I want to get you in here in September as well as you can. What'd you learn from Warren Buffett, 94 years old?
We've always believed that quality companies, good cash flow, competitive moats, excellent management teams is the way that you invest. That's how we invest. That's Warren Buffett's philosophy. And again, remember, he says, rule number one, don't lose money. Rule number two, don't forget rule number one. So we try to build these resilient portfolios for clients.
Nancy Curtin, thank you so much. Too short a visit. Let's do it again soon. Nancy Curtin, of course, with Alti, Tiedemann, their chief investment officer, head of their investment advisory division. Futures up 23. Dow futures up 79. Nancy, you need to get up because we've got an extra special guest in here. Nancy, thank you so much for coming in. Here in our new studios, they showed me an architectural rendering. We're rumored to have new studios next year. Carol Masser had a tantrum and said, if I don't get 2,000 square feet,
a Carol Masser tantrum I've never seen.
Oh, it's something to see.
I just want great lights. That's all I'm asking for, and bigger
these
cameras.
These aren't working for you.
Not exactly.
She's doing 10 to 12 today. She'll be on here in 42 minutes with Tim Stanovic. Then she goes out.
Wait, who?
Yeah, what's his last name? Sorry.
Well done. You make me
He got it
so
right.
happy.
She goes out to the Open.
Yes.
To do it, and you're wearing Poochie today. I mean, you really.
I actually am going to change. Like Tim, I wear shorts at the Open.
We were wondering. That was a hotly debated question about an hour ago on the show.
What's the energy at the Open this year?
I have to tell you, you would never think that anybody has any economic problems at the U.S. Open.
That's what Paul Sweeney said.
It's unbelievable. And this is not an inexpensive place to go. I mean, if you buy tickets in advance, they're cheaper. But man, everything. Honeydews cost you 20-something bucks.
20-something bucks.
I got a roast beef sandwich yesterday. It was $27.
Wow.
I mean, it was good, but listen, to be fair, and we talk about this, right? There are different parts of America, certainly when you look at the economic strata. And this is people globally who can afford a lot of stuff.
But
it's great.
It's the polarity of the market. HSBC had a beautiful, Carol reads the research of our guests. I never read it.
Yeah.
But HSBC
We know that too.
had a beautiful thing. Seriously, on this Labor Day.
If I could only have the brain of Tom Keene, I wouldn't have to read it all.
On this Labor Day, the split between the haves and the have-nots is, I would suggest, in our lifetime, we've never seen it.
Listen, I listen to you guys all the time in the morning, and you do this great mix of business and markets and politics. And what's interesting is this is why we have such a close race, because there are so many Americans who don't feel like democracy has served them well. And they see it when they struggle to, get groceries, put food on their table, find a place to live. I mean, it's tough out there. It's tough. And that's why I think it's interesting. And even though we see it's unbelievable crowds, record crowds at the U.S. Open, that is not America.
But it's great. You're doing 10 to 12. You take the Surveillance Sikorsky
of course,
out to the Open.
I take an eVTOL. I'm worried about the environment, so it's an electric,
Do you get to watch any tennis? No.
Yeah, actually, I want to tell you, who did I watch last night? Because I'm not Tim is the tennis guy. Dan Evans of the UK, longest match on Tuesday, like 5.5 hours.
Watched him last night.
Last night watching, incredible match against an Argentinian, and it was really kind of cool stuff. What's really great is, there's Arthur Ashe, but there's all these side courts, and you can be like right next to these players. Oh, hi, John Tucker. But it's really pretty phenomenal what you can see there. It's just pretty cool stuff.
She's such a diva.
Tom, a big Alcaraz fan. Disappointed.
Thank you so much.
I'm honored you noticed me.
Folks, in 34 minutes, you can have more of this with Carol Masser and Tim.
But join us later.
And then, of course, a really interesting U.S. Open this year. Maybe not rain-induced.
We should go, Tom. You want to go?
Even without the Williams.
That enthusiasm.
Which is pretty amazing.
Futures up 24.
No bow tie.
Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. September rate cut was written in stone, maybe more so with the central bank's preferred inflation reading this morning. A core personal consumption expenditures price index increasing 0.2%. Swaps traders continue to project about 100 basis points of Fed reductions before the year is over. And there you have it, the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. After that economic report, after a few earnings reports, S&P 500 26 points higher out of the gate. That's up 0.5% right now. 56.18 on the index. Dow Jones Industrial Average on track for another record right now, intraday record, up 90 points, a rise of 0.2%, 41,419 on the index. And the NASDAQ 100 up 189 points. That is a rise of 1%. We'll do NVIDIA in the early going right now. After yesterday's 6% decline, it is up 1.8%. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your opening bell report. Tom.
John Tucker, thank you so much for the opening here. NASDAQ up 1%, but just here in the first minute, the lift. Jason Furman out 42 minutes ago with the PCE summary he does. It's a public, he should be working for the government. I mean, sometimes he does.
Very lucid
He's up at Harvard.
explanations, yeah.
He's got an ecumenical study of all the silly inflation stuff we look at. His core PCE, 1 month annual rate, 2.0%. 3 month annual rate, 1.7%. 6 month annual rate, 2.6. 12 month annual rate, 2.6. That's core PCE from the teacher of Ec 10 up at Harvard. Victoria Fernandez knows this. She's with Crossmark Global Investments, and she's joining us in the studio because it's cooler in New York than it is in Houston.
Absolutely.
That's all there is to it. Thank you so much for joining today. Is the battle won on inflation? And if you have disinflation, does that mean earnings are worth more?
Well, I don't know if I would say the battle is won on inflation. I think we're heading that way. I know, Powell has come out and said, look, we think we're done there, and they're moving on looking at the labor market. But there's a lot of underlying elements in inflation that I think can still hold us up towards this 3% level. I don't think it's going to go away as quickly as the Fed's anticipating. So when we look at the idea of 100 basis points cut from now through the end of the year, I think that's a little optimistic. I think we may see fewer than that because there are other elements.
In the Bob Dole, Victoria Fernandez world, my money question is simple. What are your clients doing? Not the talk of strategy, but is the exuberance there? Have we reached a bull market silly season?
It's interesting. Earlier, people were talking about the 60-40 portfolio, and I will tell you that is what we have seen coming in from our clients more than anything. They want that balanced strategy. They're not exactly sure what's going to happen with all of the uncertainties that we have, whether it's here domestically, whether it's geopolitics, whether it's inflation, the concerns about the consumer. Having that diversification in their portfolio is what they want, with a little bit of extra kick on something. So maybe that's a covered call strategy. Maybe that's a little bit of a long-short component. They want to be invested in the market, which we agree with, but they want to be a little bit cautious. So they've been listening to what we've been telling them.
Triage those risks for us. They come to you worried about all those many things, what's happening overseas, inflation, the election, what have you. Mm-hmm. How do you rate all of that? What do you see of those risks as being the one that, is something that should strike fear in investors right now?
It's going to take turns, right? There's going to be different elements that kind of rear its head at different point in time. Obviously, as we get closer to the election, that's going to cause more volatility in this market. The thing we have to look at there is, you have to have a lot of these things passed. We have to have a government that changes dramatically. I'm not sure a lot of it will come to fruition. So what we're looking at is more when it comes to the consumer component. We think that's key to this market, the labor market and the consumer. We got the spending and income numbers today. Again, we have spending almost double on a percentage basis what income is. That does not bode well as credit card delinquencies go higher, as savings rates go down, as wages stagnate, as job losses increase. So to us, that's what we're most worried about.
Victoria Fernandez driving the market higher up 0.8% on the NASDAQ. Dow up 132 points. It's like the ascendance of the Houston Astros.
There's just nothing better right now.
It's just like the time of year. It gets under 80 degrees in Houston and the Astros start playing.
And the bats start flying.
The bats start flying. My good friend Jim Cramer and I agree that the fact is on stocks, if you're lucky, 30% of stocks at any given time are doing well. Within financial wealth management, are you focused on owning the 30% and not owning the 70%? How do you try to find excellence in alpha in the winners that are there?
So it really comes from that fundamental analysis that we do. We're not looking so much at trends as looking really at what do the cash flows look like on these companies? You know Bob and how he likes to dig down underneath, right? We want to look at persistence of earnings, predictability of earnings. These are the companies we like. So do we aim towards certain sectors? Sure. Right now we're looking at healthcare. We've been investing in financials. These things have done well for us. But within those sectors, even within staples, you want to look at those companies that have that stability that can continue to generate good returns during volatility. So that's where we focus, looking at those underlying factors.
What is your takeaway from what we've seen with NVIDIA this week? And again, I just remark on and laugh at the way that those results were characterized, that you could call that kind of underwhelming or not what the market wanted. What's your perspective on that, and what takeaway can we take from that, just about the way that we look at the performance of companies and their projections going forward?
So we've been a little different than probably most people out on the street, where we've been trimming those high growth tech names all year long, anticipating that at some point you're not going to continue to grow at 400% year over year,
it's
right?
Hard to do.
So you can still have great numbers and the trend be slowing, and that's what we saw with NVIDIA. So I was a little surprised that the market reacted the way it did. I mean, still solid numbers there, but what it tells us is the breadth is growing. We've all been waiting for that all year, to have that breadth in the market. We're seeing it in stock prices. I want to see it in earnings.
Fidelity out with the number of millionaire 401k. How do you manage $1 million 401k differently than a $150,000 401k? Are they all the same?
You're not going to manage it differently in the idea of where you want to allocate your resources based on the macro that's out there. Your strategy will be the same. Can you have a little more diversification? Yes. Can you maybe add a couple extra elements of something into that portfolio to juice income a little bit? Yes, you can do that. But from the 100,000 foot level, you're investing the same.
Houston, overweight, energy, it's genetic. Victoria Fernandez on energy.
Look, energy has been struggling. We know it's one of the sectors that has not been doing as well, even though you look at balance sheets, you've got some strong balance sheets there. There's some cash there. They're waiting, right? They want to know what policy is going to look like going forward before they jump in and put a lot of CapEx to work. If you take tech out of the equation, CapEx is actually coming down. Some of that has to do with the energy companies. We anticipate seeing that turn. So we think you need to have some exposure, probably go for some of those big integrated names at this point.
I get one more question here. Michael Barr's got to get in here and do the news. Victoria Fernandez, can I do a major shout out to Texas A&M with the only real football game this weekend? Notre Dame, Texas A&M. I mean, we had Brian Levitt on from Michigan.
Who are they playing with? Fresno.
Michigan, come on. You'd figure Texas A&M would be playing, the Teachers College of Louisiana or whatever. I don't know. Victoria, that's very cool.
Yes.
To see Notre Dame playing Texas A&M. It's like, that's a Texas spirit.
That's exactly right. Let's go Aggies.
We're going to have to see. Give me an oil price here. Crossmark, you guys live this stuff. Brent crude, West Texas Intermediate.
Yeah, I mean, look.
Stability or higher?
I think it's going to go a little bit higher, but not tremendously. We're not looking at $100 coming in. Do we go around 80 and stay there because of geopolitical reasons? Right. We can, but I also don't think we're going to go too much lower. Demand is still there. There's still some supply concerns, so I think you'll be pretty steady around the 80 level.
It's the religion, folks. Our team has done a great job today of giving this to you with our equity coverage. You have to be in the market to participate and win. Robert Dahl, Victoria Fernandez, Crossmark, live that every day. Thank you so much.
My pleasure,
Have you
guys.
moved to New York, or is this just like a visit?
Nope, just visiting, getting my daughter ready for her senior year at NYU.
All right.
What's she
Congratulations.
taking?
Wow.
She is journalism and politics.
Oh, no.
So you know what? You can have her come sit right here.
I saw you 10 minutes ago with Mike. Is that what that was?
Yeah, we're going to bring her on in. But you know what? Her favorite show? UK Love Island, and I heard a little bit of
Also
you saying
Tom's
that
favorite
earlier.
show.
So
Victoria,
you may
that's
want to
great.
talk to her about that.
No, you talk to John Farrow about that. That's if you're at NYU and you're watching Love Island, that is a resume builder.
She's well-rounded.
Yes, Victoria Fernandez, thank you so much with Crossmark this morning. David, you didn't expect this, did you?
No, there's a lot of unexpected, a lot of surprises this morning.
Let's do a data check and save ourselves. Victoria, you have to stand up so Michael Barr can come in and sit down. That's the way we roll here. Victoria, thank you so much for
Good to see you.
coming in today. Dow up 147 points, NASDAQ up 0.8%. As I expected, the VIX comes in, not to a 14, but it's still a bull market. 15, 3 cups of coffee, 3 cups of Sanka ago. We were out at a 17 handle. Postum, I got a huge response on Postum as well. 3 cups of Postum ago, we were at
What
a
is
17.
Postum?
It's some Midwest thing. Michael Barr knows.
Is it like Ovaltine?
No. No, it's like it's only for the brave.
It's a geezer drink.
Oh yeah,
It's a geezer drink.
Yeah.
You know,
like Geritol.
Very good.
Yeah.
Nailed that. I had some this morning. Geritol and Tang. It works out great. Saving us with our news in New York City, the young Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, David, John. Kamala Harris is sustaining her momentum over Donald Trump in the latest Bloomberg News Morning Consult swing state poll. The Democrat leads by just 1 point among likely voters, a statistical tie across the 7 battleground states. But Bloomberg government's Maeve Shea reports the vice president has put the Sun Belt in play.
If you look at Georgia, if you look at Nevada, she's doing way better there than Joe Biden had just even a month before. And also North Carolina will be really interesting to watch. That hasn't gone for a Democrat in, since Obama in 2008, but it looks like that could be possibly winnable for her, which would be a huge get for Democrats.
Bloomberg government's Maeve Shea in Washington. Vice President Harris defended shifting away from some of her more liberal positions in her first major television interview of her presidential campaign. On CNN, Harris talked about changes in her policies over the years, specifically her reversals on fracking and decriminalizing illegal border crossings. As for other issues,
Extending the child tax credit to $6,000 for families for the first year of their child's life. There's the work that we're going to do that is about investing in the American family around affordable housing, a big issue in our country right now.
former President Trump says he watched some of the CNN interview with Kamala Harris. He spoke at a town hall in La Crosse, Wisconsin last night.
She didn't look like a leader to me, I'll be honest. I don't see her negotiating with President Xi of China. I don't see her with Kim Jong-un like we did with Kim Jong-un.
Trump is set to appear tonight at the annual gathering of the conservative group Moms for Liberty. A wet and hotter than usual summer is linked to the spread of mosquito-borne diseases. Health officials in Wisconsin confirmed 2 people have now died from West Nile virus. Illinois also reporting a death. Nearly 300 cases have been reported across more than 30 states. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, David, John.
It is not funny. David Gura and Tom Keene here on the animals, the ticks in all of New England. David, you're living it in real time. To be honest, I used to live it in real time, but we should state to all of you across this nation, ticks, mosquitoes, these reports from authorities have to be taken seriously.
Yeah, and they it never ceases to surprise me how small these things are. So you think you've checked checked twice.
Well, those
lo
are
and
the
behold,
deer
there
ticks.
they are.
The
The deer
smaller
ticks.
they are, the more virulent the tick is.
Which is scary.
You can't see some of them. The deer ticks are the ones that are really dangerous.
Very hard to spot.
That scares me because there's always deer in our yard every day. It scares
This
me.
coming from a guy who almost got attacked seriously by a bear going to work.
Wow.
Yeah, well, then the Pittsburgh Steelers
Hazard
are in
pay.
town after that. Serious stuff. Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Major stock averages in the early going all higher. The NASDAQ Composite Index up about 1%, 166 points higher right now. The S&P 500 0.6% higher, is up 34 points. We're at 56.26. Still shy of the record close. Dow Jones Industrial Average, after a record close, another record close yesterday. Right now, it continues higher, up 53 points. That is up 0.1% right now, 41,385. The data, PCE today, largely as expected. Headline prices in line. The year-over-year change in core a little lower than the economic forecast. And Intel, working with investment bankers, discussing various scenarios, including a split of its product design and manufacturing business. And finally, Reuters reporting OPEC Plus likely to increase supply starting in October. Brent right now down 1.3%. NYMEX crude 2.4% lower, 74.10 a barrel, and filling up under $3, $2.99 a gallon this morning. We check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. David and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Lift to the market here. The character of the lift's important. Obviously, it's Friday-like trading and all that, but it's really a frame out of the tech of the week, the economics of the week, and you end up with the litmus paper of the system. The NASDAQ 100 up 1%. Up 187 points. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 30 points. Generally, the tape doing better than futures did, 30 minutes ago or so. There seems to be a sprightliness to it, maybe as everybody tries to dash out the door. Gold, we're watching, down $11, $25.49 as well, and oil has been difficult. Where was I the night Mr. Trump won the election? I was standing next to Ian Bremmer at a wonderful event that he had, and he and I stood there in shock. The one person on the planet not in shock the night that Mr. Trump won the presidency, it was David Wasserman of the Cook Report, a huge career of excellence, made more so by his essay before the Trump-Clinton election, where he said, Trump can do it. David Gura and David Wasserman.
Dave, great to speak with you. It's been a long time coming. I'm glad to have you here. And I want to start with the polling that we got yesterday. That's the Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll. And what we saw there was a lot of movement in these 7 swing states. And I'll use that as a jumping off point to ask you about the shifts that you've seen at the Cook Political Report in recent days as well. There was a lot of talk about a potential honeymoon at the convention. Seems like there's been one long sustained honeymoon for the Democratic candidate since she was named that just a few weeks ago. What are you seeing? What stands out to you when you look at those key swing states?
Well, David, this has been an extraordinary image makeover in just 40 days. Kamala Harris 2 months ago in our average was at a 37% favorability and 53% unfavorability. And she's gone from -16 to just -3 on average, 45-48, which qualifies as smashing by today's standards of polarization. And the key to Kamala Harris closing the gap both nationally and in these swing states is with lower engagement voters who are uniquely down on Joe Biden but not yet ready to embrace Republicans. What we noticed in our May battleground survey was that Joe Biden was leading by 4 points among 100% turnout voters, people who showed up in all 4 of the most recent federal elections. And yet he was trailing Trump by 10, 51-41 among everyone else. Now, Kamala Harris in our August survey was leading by 4 among those 100% reliable turnout, most civic-minded voters, but she had closed the gap to just 3 points among everyone else. And what that speaks to is that she is a better pop culture candidate than Joe Biden was. And I think she's also made a wise decision by, rather than leaning into the historic nature of her candidacy, emphasizing her middle-class upbringing and immigrant roots.
I want to stick with that. I'm sure that you watched the interview last night, as I did, with Dana Bash and Vice President Harris and Governor Tim Walz, and something that stood out to me was how disinterested she seemed to be in talking about race, in talking about gender. I think that was true of the speech that she gave at the Democratic National Convention as well. Are you surprised by that, the fact that she's not leaning into that? And do you suspect that's going to continue to reap rewards for her?
Well, Democrats are wary of the ghosts of 2016. Remember Suffragette White and I'm with her and breaking the glass ceiling, and that resonated with Democrats 8 years ago. But among swing voters, there was a sense that, well, Hillary Clinton's part of a dynasty, and what is she going to do for my bottom line? Kamala Harris knows that the biggest hurdle remaining for her is getting over the hump on the economy. Mm-hmm. And in our survey, she was still down 6 to Trump when it came to who voters trusted more to rein in inflation and the cost of living. And of course, she was trusted by 19 points more on abortion, and Trump had a 14 advantage on immigration. And those are issues that partisans care about. And there's no doubt that both campaigns want to focus on their best issues. However, the economy and pocketbook concerns are really top of mind for the 6 or 7% of voters who are still genuinely up for grabs, undecided or flirting with third-party candidates, or people who were expressing their support for RFK Jr. before he dropped out.
David Wasserman, you and David Gura are having a field day here. I'm loving this, folks. It's like Political Junkie 101. David Wasserman, have you ever seen a prosecutor do a presidential debate? Is America ready for the attorney of San Francisco at the lectern on September 10th?
Well, we've seen a prosecutor in a vice presidential debate, and Kamala Harris acquitted herself fairly well against Mike Pence. And this time around, I do think there is more downside risk for Donald Trump. Now, when we think back to June 27th, obviously Trump won that debate, but that was because the sitting president was incoherent. And if you take Trump's performance in isolation, it was nothing to write home about. So Kamala Harris is relentlessly on message. That's part of the reason why Democrats and her campaign have kind of sealed her in this hermetically sealed bubble, tightly controlled interview on CNN, very little else that is off the cuff. And meanwhile, even by his standards, Donald Trump has veered off script in the last month and a half. And that's been a big reason why Republicans have lost the battle so far to redefine Kamala Harris. And she has come across more as the challenger or a change candidate than the incumbent vice president she is. It's up to Trump and Republicans to remind voters that Democrats are the ones in charge now.
I'd be remiss, Dave, if I didn't ask you lastly just about sort of how things have changed down ballot. I remember just maybe 6-7 weeks ago sitting across from Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, talking about the potential consequences of there being a Biden re-election campaign and that hurting folks down ballot. Dave, you know well, I'm from North Carolina. I don't know if Tom knows this. We both play the fiddle. And that's kind of how you and I crossed paths during the pandemic, just on social media.
Kids?
But talk to me about North Carolina. I'm very curious. I mean, this is a governor's race that was incredibly close, still is incredibly close. But I know that you and your colleagues have moved it now from leaning Republican to a toss-up.
That's right. And by the way, when we look at the core battleground states, North Carolina seemed out of play for Democrats at the presidential level when Biden was in the race. Now that gap has closed. And it could be that the governor's race is having some upstream effect. Now, I really do think that Kamala Harris energizing black voters and young voters is the chief driver of why states like North Carolina and Georgia have become very close again. But there's no doubt that the ad barrage of Attorney General Josh Stein, who's running for governor, against Mark Robinson, the Republican who has just been hammered in ads with him in his own words talking about abortion and women and some of the more exotic things that he's said. It's clearly opened up a lead for Stein in the governor's race there, and it may be hurting the Republican brand writ large. The other challenge about North Carolina that's a bit unique, it's a more small town and rural state than Georgia. It certainly has a lower black population. About 20% of North Carolina's electorate is black versus about 30% in Georgia. But also, when you put the Charlotte and Research Triangle areas together, it's only about 41% of the state's vote, whereas Atlanta makes up 59% of Georgia's vote. So that's why North Carolina has been a tougher nut for Democrats to crack.
It's been wonderful. Don't be a stranger. David Wasserman, the Cook Political Report, can't say enough about it. It's well worth the subscription to the Cook Political Report to get. It's like, two, three just definitive articles per week, led by Amy and David. Can't say enough about that. Futures, we're open. Well, I said futures. Sorry, David. I was doing the early morning thing. Oh, wait. Stenovic and Masser just walked in the studio. It must be 3 p.m. Dow up 66. Bloomberg Surveillance